Chapter 1380. Because it's almost 8,000 words, it's a bit late. There's still one more chapter before dawn. Outside of Crouching Bow City, there were no more peace fires lit. Baimang's vanguard arrived at the city gates. Strong winds, yellow sand, and barren land blew the dry yellow sand into the air, hitting the flapping flags. Outside of the city, in front of Baimang's formation, there were constantly elite cavalry passing down orders. On top of Crouching Bow City, large ballistae were ready to fire. All the generals on top of the city wall subconsciously tightened their grip on their blades. A loud and shrill horn suddenly sounded. If it was in the past when Baimang attacked a city south of the river, they would usually order the civilians and surrendered soldiers to charge forward. Not only would they fill up the trenches, they would also use up a large amount of arrows from the defending side. At most, they would use the auxiliary troops to push the cart forward, and the cavalry would swarm out. Once they arrived at the city walls, they would fire tens of thousands of arrows at the same time. As long as the defending side's morale was shaken, the Baimang soldiers would be able to crush them in one battle. However, today, when the army arrived at Crouching Bow City, under the command of Northern Mang's great commander Yang Yuanzhan, they displayed a completely different siege style compared to the past 200 years of northern barbarians invading and raiding. At the same time the two flanks of 3,000 cavalry began to charge forward, there was a type of military heavy weapon that rarely appeared in the northwestern border fortress that appeared on a large scale. Catapult carts. Yang Yuanzhan had set up no less than 600 catapults in one night. The largest catapults required 200 people with outstanding strength, and each rock weighed 100 pounds. Not only did the 600 catapults bring a considerable amount of rocks with them when they went down south, they also swept up all the rocks north of Crouching Bow City. At this time, all of the Northern Mang soldiers who were biding their time couldn't help but raise their heads, quietly waiting for that spectacular scene. Countless giant boulders would be flung high into the sky, and then smashed into Hidden Bow City's walls, or landed on Ring City's military path. The 600 catapults seemed to be facing Crouching Bow City, but from the top of the city walls, one would know that they were arranged in an arc. The stronger ones would be placed in the center of the arc furthest away from the city, while the weaker ones would be placed on the left and right, and so on. No one knew who was the first to shout, but the Baimang soldiers near the catapults shouted the same words in unison. When the first 50 kilograms of flint, wrapped in oilcloth, was ignited, it flew high into the air and was thrown towards Crouching Bow City. It was as if a fire spirit of the heavenly court had descended to the mortal realm. Following this flint, hundreds of huge rocks smashed towards the first city at the mouth of the gorge in Yuzhou province. All the Baimang generals and soldiers were shocked by this strange siege method. Boulders fell on top of the city wall, inside the city, or were blocked by the city wall and rolled into the moat. Both inside and outside the city were filled with the sounds of wind and thunder. It was as if everyone could feel the earth trembling, as if Crouching Bow City was silently sobbing. Meanwhile, the 6,000 man cavalry that moved ahead before the rocks were tossed but slower than the rocks smashing into the city naturally weren't going to directly attack the city. Using cavalry to attack a city, unless there was no other choice, even the most powerful of commanders wouldn't be able to bear this type of pain. The purpose of these cavalry troops was only to escort the infantry 200 steps outside the city, to help their own side suppress the archers on the city walls. After the cavalry troops on the two wings that had opened up some distance with the infantry, after firing a rain of arrows at the top of the city walls, they no longer continued forward, instead quickly moving diagonally outwards to make room for the cavalry troops behind them. That was why the two cavalry troops were like a flood meeting a reef, but they didn't risk their lives to collide with it, instead scattering to the left and right on their own. When one of the robust cavalry commanders turned around, he gave the city wall a look. On top of the city wall, as one of Yang Yuanzhan's personal commanders, he knew about the existence of the 600 catapult carts. Moreover, he knew about the power of the catapult carts even earlier than normal commanders. Originally, in his opinion, there was no need for the 2 cavalry troops to protect Crouching Bow City. Under the concentrated bombardment of several hundred boulders, Crouching Bow City's defenders would be scared to the point where they couldn't even raise their heads, allowing the infantry outside the city to push all the way out of the moat. However, during the charge, casualties continuously appeared in front of and behind him. The ballistae on the city walls fired out waves after waves of arrows, among which, 2 cavalry troops were actually directly penetrated by a giant ballista bolt. The 2 cavalry corpses were nailed to the ground just like that by the ballista bolts. If one were to say that Bailiang had long heard of the sharpness of the ballista bolts, then the fact that Crouching Bow City's arrows were still raining down in an orderly manner while the boulders were exploding made this commander feel very conflicted. He had personally seen 2 Yuzhou soldiers being smashed by boulders, yet the nearby archers on the city walls still shot out arrows that were above standard. The commander curled his lips. Were these Yuzhou people really not afraid of death? There was a pile of rotten meat right next to their feet. Under the cover of the boulders and the 2 flanks of Beimang, the ballista bolts from Crouching Bow City were increasingly concentrated on the attacking infantry of the Beimang army. More and more infantry were pierced through by the ballista bolts, and there were even some unlucky ones who were shot in the chest by a single bolt. The inertia of the bolts caused them to slide back a dozen or so steps, causing the foot soldiers and shield soldiers behind them to fall to the ground. Even more of them were shot to death by the ballista bolts on the city walls. This was especially true when the infantry's battle line became uneven. The soldiers and auxiliary soldiers who were the most courageous and daring to charge at the very front were targeted by the master archers on the city walls. The ballista bolts weren't weak, but they were like a drop in the bucket in the face of the dense swarm of locusts. There was still no end to them. Like a swarm of black locusts, the slightly crowded foot soldiers did not care about the corpses and the wounded at their feet and continued to charge forward. A burly armored archer on the city walls drew his bow to the fullest. Just as he was about to shoot at a Beimang barbarian leader who was loudly giving orders to fill the trenches, an arrow pierced through his throat. His corpse was randomly dragged to the side, and the archer behind him quickly took his place. Continuously drawing the bow, especially to the fullest, would damage the arm the most. In the Yuzhou army, there were strict military orders regarding the distance between the enemy and the angle of drawing the bow, and when to use the crossbow was deeply ingrained in everyone's hearts. Crossbows followed by crossbows were the unshakable laws of Bailiang. Among them, crossbows first were ballistas, waist crossbows, and pedal crossbows. As one of the 3 cities at the mouth of the gourd in Yuzhou, Sleeping Bow City didn't have as many ballistas as Liangbei's Huda City. However, it wasn't that great General Yan Wenluan didn't have enough ballistas. It was just that the size of Sleeping Bow City limited the number of ballistas. However, in the previous exchange of fire, the Beimang army still suffered heavy casualties. At a glance, there were more than 100 enemy soldiers killed by the ballista bolts. 2 of the Beimang generals who were holding the line were even shot to death by the ballista bolts due to carelessness. Presumably, these 2 Kiliarchs who were already extremely far away from the city walls would die with everlasting regret. After all, their craftsmen from the southern dynasty always said that their ballista bolts didn't lose to Bailiang in terms of range and strength. However, when they actually arrived on the battlefield, they discovered that this wasn't the case at all. Under the cover of the rain of arrows from the cavalry on the 2 wings, and even before the Beimang had fired their own ballistas, Sleeping Bow City's ballistas and waist crossbows had already been fired from the top of the city walls. If it weren't for the giant rocks from the catapults suppressing the rain of arrows from the top of the city walls to a certain extent, the soldiers of the Central Army would probably have died near the moat. Dismounting and sieging a city was something Northern Mang's warriors were the worst at to begin with. If they were fighting with their lives on horseback against Northern Liang's cavalry, then even if they were at a disadvantage, they still wouldn't feel any fear. However, without a horse to ride on, this really was a vexing matter. Fortunately, the soldiers in charge of attacking the city this time were all soldiers from the various border towns of the southern dynasty. They had always been a level lower in the Beimang army, so their lives, such as the elite cavalry on the two wings, weren't of much concern. A bearded Baimang general waved his hand, and the 600 catapults began to move forward, preparing for the second volley of rocks. They didn't want to destroy the city walls, but rather, they wanted to cut off the reinforcements on Sleeping Bao City as much as possible. Commander Yang Yuanzhan was determined to take down Sleeping Bao City, which had less than 6,000 soldiers. Moreover, the old general's request was to take down the city in one day. There was no lack of dissent in the commander's tent regarding this decision. Some said that the terrain outside Sleeping Bao City wasn't conducive to attacking the city. The infantry formation was too long and narrow, so it didn't make much of a difference whether they sent in 10,000 or 8,000. It was better to send them in batches and give Sleeping Bao City a constant pressure. Even if they couldn't take down the city in a day, they would be able to take it in 2 days at most, reducing the number of casualties. It was the son of the Zhong family, Zhong Tan, who was advancing with the catapults. In front of them were many self-made ballistas from the southern dynasty, as well as many scaling ladders and battering logs. There were also many siege towers that had yet to be manned by archers. Zhong Tan raised his hand to cover his forehead. Finally, Sleeping Bao City had no choice but to use light crossbows. Zhong Tan heard the constant stream of reports from the roaming cavalry. All he could hear was cold numbers, how many had died, and how many had been injured. In just an hour, more than 100 cavalry and more than 1,000 infantry had died, and this was before they had even scaled the city walls. They were all dead. All of them had died outside the moats. The furthest they had died was at the foot of Sleeping Bao City's walls. However, Zhong Tan, who could be considered one of the top sons of generals in Baimang, was surprised even by himself. He didn't feel too much emotion. Instead, he began to think of many interesting things, such as when he heard his father, Great General Zhong Shintong, talk about the early spring and autumn war. During the chaotic war between the 9 kingdoms, it was said that Liang had mobilized 60,000 cavalry to attack a majestic city of Donghua to the south. After 3 days of fierce fighting, they returned without any success. Afterwards, the entire country of Donghua celebrated, worshipping the general who had defended the country with only 10,000 men as a god. The Donghua emperor even issued an imperial edict to bestow upon him the title of Grand Tutor. Many years later, the people of Donghua finally realized that the soul-stirring defeat and victory of 70,000 men had only lost less than 600 men after 3 days of fighting. Chapter 1381. Zhong Tan sighed softly and gazed at the Yuzhou city in the distance. It could be said that it was the old master of Crouching Bao City who had stripped off the clothes and faces of the 8 kingdoms of spring and autumn step by step. He had turned the warm and affectionate war into a bloody tragedy from beginning to end. The number of deaths in battle grew higher and higher. From thousands to tens of thousands, then tens of thousands, until the Battle of West Rampart where people died every day and soldiers poured in every day. If it was said that Su Xiao had taught the 8 kingdoms of spring and autumn what cavalry warfare was, then could it be said that after Su Xiao's death, he would teach Baimang what it meant to defend a city in the Central Plains? Zhong Tan narrowed his eyes. His infantry had finally begun to scale the city walls. The city walls of Crouching Bao City were like moths and ants. On top of the city walls, rolling stones, smashing logs, and scalding oil rained down. Ladders after ladders were toppled by long hooks. One by one, Baimang's soldiers who were scaling the city walls were shot down by a rain of arrows. After they fell, the unfortunate ones who hadn't died yet were trampled to death by the rest of the siege army. The Yuzhou archers and light crossbowmen who were blocking the Baimang soldiers from scaling the city walls were also shot down by the archers on the siege towers that were almost as tall as the city walls. They fell back one after another. In this kind of concentrated shooting, those who were skilled in martial arts and those who weren't were all going to die. The few master archers on top of the city walls who still had strength in their arms were targeted by the archers in the siege towers. They were all shot down like hedgehogs full of arrows. Beimang's siege methods were unscrupulous. When the battle was at a stalemate, they took advantage of every opening and aimed the ballistae at the empty spots on the city walls. They shot out stepping arrows that were no different from large javelins and nailed them into the back of the city walls in a row, helping the Beimang soldiers scale the city walls. As for the Beimang soldiers who climbed up like agile monkeys, they were all brave soldiers that Zhong Tan had carefully selected. As Zhong Tan listened to the frontline military intelligence from the messenger cavalry, he unhurriedly passed down orders one after another to bring them back to the frontline. Although this was a deadly siege with a huge price to pay, the siege method wasn't rigid and inflexible. Just like when the defenders changed their guard, Zhong Tan would also order the Chiliarch who had lost soldiers to cross the line, to withdraw. As for the exact number of the line, in Zhong Tan's mind, he temporarily set it at 100 casualties at the beginning of the siege. Once the 20 Chiliarchs and their 20,000 soldiers had experienced the first wave of siege, the second wave would increase the number to 150. If they didn't cross the line, even if they were surnamed Yelu or Murong, they would still have to brace themselves and continue. If they crossed the line, no matter how much they wanted to fight to the death, they would have to obediently withdraw. Zhong Tan didn't care how those Chiliarchs and Centurions didn't understand. In fact, he didn't need them to understand at all. After all, he had already asked the Commander-in-Chief Yang Yuanzhan for the right to execute the generals in the front line. Whoever didn't agree with him could use their heads to disobey the military order. Zhong Tan subconsciously reached out his hand to stroke the soft mane on the back of his warhorse. This kind of command method of haggling over every detail as one's own arm was taught to the world by that white-robed general. However, most of the generals who imitated him only scratched the surface but not the essence. Firstly, they couldn't be as familiar with the fighting strength and tenacity of each commandant of the famous academies as that white-robed general. Secondly, the battlefield was constantly changing. If they deliberately pursued perfection in details, it was easy to pick up sesame seeds and throw away watermelons. What's more, the commander-in-chief would be as tired as a dog before the victory was decided. Not to mention the commander-in-chief himself, even the bannermen and messengers would have broken their arms and legs. Zhong Tan believed that he had learned more than scratched the surface, but he hadn't grasped the essence. However, Zhong Tan wasn't in a hurry. He still had to fight Wanhe and Xiaoguang City at the mouth of Yuzhou province. Furthermore, these two cities were bigger and had more guards. Zhong Tan's sitting posture was as steady as a rock. Occasionally, he would ask his maidservant Lu Daoxiang for a jug of water to moisten his throat. Otherwise, his throat would have long been smoking. The 20 Chiliarchs of the Middle Corps had all seen the scenery of the city wall at close range. Among them, 2 of them had almost succeeded in standing on the city wall. One of them was stabbed by 7 or 8 iron spears and smashed into a pile of corpses. After getting up, he saw 7 or 8 arrows inserted into the corpses not far from his feet. If he were to smash into these corpses, even if he didn't get pierced through, he definitely wouldn't be able to attack Wanhe City. Another one had just stood on the city wall and had even used his saber to chop off several spearheads. Just as he was about to step in, he was shot in the ribs by a stray arrow at a tricky angle. As he staggered and fell, he was viciously hooked by a flying hook called an iron hook. When the soldiers of Yuzhou province pulled him up, the Chiliarch whose back had hit the city wall hurriedly raised his arm and chopped randomly. Only then did he manage to chop off the iron chain. After landing on the ground in a sorry state, he took advantage of the momentum and rolled. 5 or 6 arrows whizzed down from his back. Obviously, his dazzling armor had provoked the public's anger. This caused him to feel some lingering fear when he led his troops back to the rear. He had almost become the first Yuzhou Chiliarch to die in battle. No wonder those irksome strategists before the battle had reminded them that they could wear layers of heavy armor, but under no circumstances should they wear anything too flashy and eye-catching. Those winch mounts on Crouching Bao City had mostly been destroyed, and those powerful wolf-toothed bats had been completely destroyed. The Beimang soldiers who had died to these bats were the most miserable of all. There wasn't a single piece of unscathed flesh on their bodies. They looked like pork that had been carefully shaved by a plane. Their corpses were too horrible to look at. Around noon, an especially majestic bugle horn resounded across the battlefield. The onslaught on the battlefield, which had never stopped, immediately surged. Commander Yang Yuanzhan rode his horse to Zhong Tan's side, accompanied by a group of cavalry officers and 5 or 6 strategists dressed in embroidered robes. They found that Zhong Tan was surrounded by many young civil officials sitting in front of several tables. Their brushes flew like they were flying, constantly recording the details of the battle. Yang Yuanzhan didn't greet Zhong Tan politely. Instead, he walked to the side of a young official who had been named Fast Scribe by the order of peace. He bent down and picked up a piece of paper whose ink hadn't dried yet. His handwriting was a bit messy. After Crouching Bao City's wooden bats, there are several types of clay and brick bats. Their power is slightly weaker. They destroyed 3 of our army's battering rams with a hardwood iron head. They are more than a chi long and shaped like wolf teeth. They are hidden behind the high walls of the city gates and fall down like thunder. According to reports, the age of the arrows used by Crouching Bao City varies. They have been forged for 7 or 8 years and were made in the 14th year of Yonghui. Yang Yuanzhan sneered, "What a good arrow that has been sharp for a long time. If this general has the chance, I will personally pass on these words to those Shijing officials in the Ministry of War. Let them open their eyes wide and take a good look." The fast scribe who had been implicated hurriedly stopped what he was doing. His face was full of fear and trepidation. He was afraid that one of the 13 great generals of Beimang would vent his anger on him, a small fry who hadn't even reached the official rank yet. The general gently put the paper back and smiled, "It's not your fault. You all did well. After we take down Crouching Bao City, I will personally record this merit for you." Even a great general who was ranked among the top 40 in Beimang had dismounted from his horse. Zhong Tan didn't have the thick skin to continue sitting on the horse's back. Although Yang Yuanzhan wasn't as highly regarded by the empress as Lu Gui, they were both generals of the southern dynasty. Compared to Zhong Tan's father, Zhong Shintong, Yang Yuanzhan was much more trustworthy than Zhong Shintong, not to mention his ability to mobilize troops. Furthermore, Zhong Tan was making a living under the old man's nose. Yang Yuanzhan and Zhong Tan walked side by side to the general's side. Zhong Tan said softly, "Previously in the Shijing imperial court, I heard a certain preceptor say something. At that time, my blood was boiling. Now that I think about it, I'm not so sure anymore." Yang Yuanzhan, who had just rushed over from the wounded camp, was a little unhappy. He frowned and asked, "What was it?" Zhong Tan smiled, "Beiliang is known to have the most guts in Liang. Let's break their guts and break their guts." Yang Yuanzhan asked, "What's wrong?" Chapter 1382. Zhong Tan pointed at Crouching Bao City with his horsewhip. Of course, this city can't become Xiangfan City, which sat on the fishing platform of the Central Plains for more than a decade. But even if Wanhe and Shiguang can't become Xiangfan City, what about Yuzhou? Is our Beimang really not going to accept a single soldier? Even if Xiangfan City doesn't appear in Yuzhou, what about Liangzhou, which has the most stable defensive line? Are we really going to wipe out Beiliang's 2 million households before we stop? Yang Yuanzhan laughed coldly. Haven't you noticed what kind of people are in charge of the stronghold to the north of Crouching Bao City? How old are the commanders and deputies of Crouching Bao City? After pondering for a bit, Zhong Tan was somewhat enlightened. He said with a smile, "They are all old soldiers who went to northern Mang's Heshi province in their early years. Crouching Bao City's Zhu Mu and Gao Shiqing are even almost 60 years old." From this, it seems that from the mouth of the Calabash to Crouching Bao City, although the number of soldiers is small, the troops stationed here are all people who truly dare to die. It's no wonder that Crouching Bao City's 1,000-odd valiant refugees from Liuzhou were all brought back to the south of Wuxia City. Yang Yuanzhan sighed emotionally. Yan Wenluan's move is to retreat in order to advance. Those refugees from Liuzhou all held a skeptical and wait-and-see attitude at the start. Once they're the first to die at the Calabash defensive line in Yuzhou, we won't even need Beimang to summon them to surrender. They'll start a rebellion on their own and even implicate all the refugees who left Liuzhou, as well as the situation in Liuzhou. However, they'll first die at Crouching Bao City and Wuxia City, and when the time comes, they'll retreat again and again until they reach Xiaoguang City. Put yourself in their shoes. What would you think if you were a refugee? Would you dare to fight? The answer is obvious. So many Yuzhou soldiers have died before it's their turn to walk onto the battlefield. Since they've come all the way to Yuzhou, why should they fear death? Zhong Tan, this is precisely where Yan Wenluan uses her troops. Zhong Tan grunted in acknowledgement. Zhong Tan suddenly laughed and said, the Chang and Rong tribes were especially valiant in their attacks on the city. It was unexpected. Yang Yuanzhan said calmly, the order of peace announced that after Beiliang is pacified, the people of Beimang, who were originally divided into 4 classes, will have a 5th class, Liangren. Then, the Chang tribes, who are currently at the bottom of the hierarchy, will finally be 1 class higher. Although Zhong Tan knew about this, he still had a look of disbelief on his face. He asked, is this really possible? Is this enough to make people face death with equanimity? Yang Yuanzhan said in a soft voice, the Central Plains has many outstanding strategists. They don't fight against the strategists whom they assist wholeheartedly, so they have a graceful bearing that we can't imagine. Not to mention the Emperor's preceptor whose surname was Yuan in Liyang's capital, not to mention Nailan Yusi who was far away in Nanjiang, and not to mention the tide-listening pavilions Li Shan, who had already died. How did these 100,000 refugees appear? How did they willingly submit to Beiliang? How did the Wu castle of the gourd mouth come to be? How did they fight to the death against our army? How did Beiliang's pastures, rations, and soldiers move around to help Beiliang fight one country on one land? Zhong Tan nodded. Fortunately, we also have the order of peace. Yang Yuanzhan suddenly lowered his voice and said, when you feel that we can break into the city, bring the elites and personally enter the city. Zhong Tan, who had never thought about this, was just about to refuse when Yang Yuanzhan said in a tone that brooked no refusal, Beimang needs heroes. Ever since that loud horn sounded at noon, the walls of Crouching Bao City had become the gates of hell. People were dying at every moment, and the rate at which they were dying was increasing. The Beimang besiegers, who had already been replenished to 20,000 men, were switching out 1,000 men at a faster and faster rate. Even though Zhong Tan had already raised the limit to 200 men, he still couldn't slow down this astonishing rate. The only good news was that after these siege soldiers experienced the first 2 or even the 3rd siege, they became more and more clear on how to avoid the mud bricks, more and more aware of how to be a bit more vigilant, pay attention to the arrows that shot out from the corner towers. Many northern Mang soldiers who couldn't help but feel their legs go weak during their first siege, now completely forgot themselves as they carried their shields and rushed forward. They could already completely ignore the corpses below the city walls, ignore the howls and groans of those who were about to die. Most importantly, they could clearly feel the decline of the city's offensive under their own continuous assault. There was a constant stream of soldiers rushing to the front lines of Crouching Bao City. At the very beginning, there were only 500 soldiers, but now, there were only 300 who were still in good condition. Then, there were less than 100 who were injured, and finally, there were 34 soldiers who had to run up the stairs at the sound of a single command. By the time buried Bao City Lord Zhu Mu, who was overseeing the tall city gate tower, arrived at the city walls, Deputy General Gao Shiqing had already led 200 personal guards to fight on the city walls for more than 2 hours. If it wasn't for the iron spear of this white-haired yet vigorous old general being incomparably powerful, if it wasn't for the fact that there were many outstanding experts among this deputy general's personal guards, the city walls should be filled with northern Mang barbarians right now. Below the inner city walls, the corpses of their fellow soldiers who didn't have time to clean up the mess piled up. In the end, the crouching Bao city guards could only hold back their tears and throw the corpses down. The corpses piled up like a mountain. Zhu Mu personally led 300 elite soldiers to support Gao Shiqing, slaughtering the 100 or so barbarians who had already jumped onto the city walls to engage in close combat. Zhu Mu wielded a cold blade in both hands, and the momentum of his blade was like a rainbow. 7 or 8 barbarians from the north were chopped in half by his blade alone. However, even if his soldiers managed to push back the ladders that had more than a dozen enemy soldiers to the ground, they still couldn't stop the bloodthirsty Beimang barbarians from climbing up the city walls one after another. Zhu Mu watched as Gao Shiqing, who was known as the Duke of Beautiful Beard, beheaded a Beimang barbarian who looked like a centurion, kicked the headless corpse, and sent another barbarian who had just climbed up the city walls with his blade flying down. Zhu Mu sneered loudly, "Old man Gao, why are you so useless? Didn't you want me to come back and retrieve that spear for you when it's almost dark? There's still more than 2 hours to go before it gets dark." Covered in blood, Gao Shiqing didn't make a sound. He stabbed a barbarian to death with his spear, then swept his spear across and swept away another barbarian who had jumped down from the top of the city walls. Half an hour later, the only cavalry in the city was the first-class cavalry of Yuzhou province, which consisted of 2 riders per person. These 400 barbarians who didn't have a chance to charge out of the city also began to climb the city walls. Before they climbed the city walls, their warhorses, which had been dependent on them for many years, were all killed by them. They didn't want to kill their own mounts with their own hands, so they could only switch horses and silently draw their blades and spears. In the dusk, the setting sun was as red as blood. The main general, Zhu Mu, and the deputy general, Gao Shiqing, stood back to back. Zhu Mu, whose armor was in tatters, gasped for breath. His chest had been heavily injured by a blade, and his vision blurred. He shook his head fiercely and asked with difficulty, "Old man Gao, I, Zhu Mu, am only willing to die in crouching Bao City because of the group of disappointing wastrels in my family. They all fled Yuzhou and went to Jiangnan. These past few months, I've been looked down upon by a bunch of old fellows. They almost look at me like I'm a Beimang barbarian. That's why I'm willing to die in crouching Bao City. So what are you after? Didn't you scold me back then? Why did you take the initiative to switch places with Li Qianfu's nephew? Are you tired of living?" Gao Shiqing reached out and pulled out an arrow from his waist. It had broken through his armor but didn't penetrate his bones. He spat out a mouthful of blood. "My entire family stayed in Yuzhou. I'm not as greedy as your son and grandson. I live with a clear conscience. Even if I die in the future, I die with a clear conscience. Gao Shiqing doesn't owe anyone anything in this life. In the 2nd year of Yonghui, you saved my life in Beimang's Tangerine province. This time, I'm here to accompany you. Let's call it even. When we're underground, don't call me brother. I, Gao Shiqing, can't afford to lose face when I see the great general." The top of crouching Bao City's walls were filled with shouts of "Kill all the Beiliang bastards." When a group of soldiers far more valiant than the Beimang soldiers who had attacked the city climbed up the walls, Zhu Mu's hands were first chopped off, then his head. Gao Shiqing's back was against the city wall. 5 or 6 iron spears pierced through his body. The old general died while holding a spear. In the night, one of the vanguard general's personal guards stood on top of the city wall and blew the last horn on the battlefield. Regardless of whether it was friend or foe, the nearly 20,000 dead people inside and outside crouching Bao City were destined not to hear this sound. Zhong Tan, who had contributed greatly to Beimang's Yuzhou front, slowly closed his eyes. He seemed to hear it. The wind blew through Crouching Bow City. It was as if he was weeping and complaining. Chapter 1383. If it were not for the severely worded urgent letter from the Bailiang Protectorate, the commander of the Bailiang Infantry, Yan Wenluan, would not be standing on the walls of Shaoguang City right now, but on the walls of Luanhe City. Thus, when the news of the Baimang vanguard breaking through Crouching Bow City in a single day spread back, the Yuzhou military and political bigwigs all felt a lingering fear. If something had happened to Great General Yan, then what was the point of defending the Gourd Gate? It must be known that in the past 2 or 3 years, the Yuzhou military would always say, "It doesn't make a difference whether Bailiang has His Royal Highness or not, but Yuzhou has General Yan or not." Of course, there was no one who dared to say such shameful words now. Yan Wenluan and Qin Yunxue, the two stabilizing forces of Yuzhou, walked side by side to a ballista nicknamed Brother Nine Oxen. Among the Bailiang ballistae, the 9 oxen and 2 tigers ballistae were widely distributed in the major cities. Yan Wenluan weighed the huge ballista that was no different from a javelin with a calm expression, but the thoughts of the people behind him were more or less the same as that ballista. According to the plan, Crouching Bow City would not be able to hold on to the death if Baimang only sent 150,000 soldiers south. However, even though Baimang had sent twice as many soldiers to the eastern front as expected, Crouching Bow City was still not able to hold on for even a single day. This was truly shocking. He Zhonghu, who was personally in charge of the military affairs of the 3 cities at the Gourd Gate, could curse Zhu Mu and Gao Shiqing to vent his anger, but the others did not have the guts or the heart to do so. After all, the 6,000 people of Crouching Bow City had already died in battle. The dead were the most important. Moreover, when had those people ever embarrassed the Yuzhou army? Huang Fu Shi said with a complicated expression, Baimang's infantry not only has a large number of refined bows and crossbows, they also have a total of 600 catapults. First, they used 20,000 men to take turns attacking the city. Despite the heavy losses, General Zhong Tan still ordered them to replenish each chili arch with 1,000 men, and they fought until they broke through Liangbao City. He Zhong suddenly sneered, "The Baimang barbarians are using Crouching Bow City to train their troops. Even an idiot would know that once these bastards break through Crouching Bow City, they'll definitely tear down half the city. When the time comes to attack Luanhe, the catapults won't just fire 2 rounds." Yan Wenluan asked calmly, "Have the 800 cavalry in Luanhe City been recalled?" Huang Fuji nodded and said, "He's already on his way back to Shaoguang City." No one had expected the Baimang barbarians to attack the city with such ferocity. They didn't even give the Crouching Bow City's cavalry a chance to harass them. If that Zhong Tan wasn't so stubborn, the Baimang infantry would have lost at least 2,000 to 3,000 men. He Zhong slammed his fist on the city wall and said with great heartache, "They're all good men of our Yuzhou." Yan Wenluan gently put down the arrow. The Shaoguang City Lord, Xia Qingshu, secretly swallowed his saliva and mustered up his courage to say, "Great General, because we moved the Yuzhou soldiers out of Crouching Bow City and Luanhe City, a commotion has occurred in Luanhe City." The moment this sensitive topic was brought up, everyone, including He Zhong and Huang Fushi, looked at Yan Wenluan cautiously. Yan Wenluan's expression remained the same. She said indifferently, "A commotion. Aren't you making it sound too easy?" "What?" "You, Xia Qingshu, are related to Luanhe City's Yang Tuo by marriage, so you're helping him play dumb. If I remember correctly, the Hupong camp of Luanhe City that threatened the great general with a mutiny is one of the few old battalions in Yuzhou. Their 2 captains were the trusted subordinates of Zhong Hongwu and Lu Yuanji. When Zhong Hongwu lost his position, that captain of ours removed his armor and resigned to show his loyalty. That's fine, since most of the soldiers under Zhong Hongwu's command are like that. However, Sun Shu, who was once old Lu's personal guard, shouldn't be so daring. Tell me, everyone present, how many of you are dissatisfied with me retreating the Liuzhou soldiers from the front lines?" No one on the city wall dared to breathe too loudly, especially Xiaoguang City's great general Xia Qingshu and his 2 deputies. They had already dropped to their knees, not daring to utter a single word of apology. He Zhong hurriedly tried to smooth things over, saying helplessly, "Look at what you're saying. You're already putting on such a pretentious front. Who would dare to speak the truth to you?" Yan Wenluan didn't say anything. He Zhong sighed and smiled at the 3 generals of Xiaoguang City. He said amiably, "All of you, rise." How many times has the great general said that a man's knees are not for kneeling to others? 2 of you have been to Mount Qingliang and met the great general before. When have you not been told to just cup your fists and salute? Yan Wenluan suddenly said, "Hupong Camp, remove its name." With these words, even He Zhong's expression changed, to say nothing of the kneeling Xie Qingshu and the other 2. If the Beiliang Old Battalion lost a battle, or even won a battle but lost to the other old battalions, it would be as uncomfortable as being stabbed. As for removing its name, that would be even more uncomfortable than being killed. In Beiliang, even if all of the old battalions died in battle, they could still retain their name. In fact, all of the old battalions loved to compete with each other. Over the years, they would first compete to see who had killed the most enemies and whose battle prowess was superior. In the end, they would even compare the number of times their battalion had been wiped out. Moreover, the one who won in the last round would be very convincing. For example, the Xiandeng Camp, which was one of the oldest battalions along with the Lotus Seed Camp, the Partridge Camp, and the Horse Camp, relied on this to win first place. For many years, they had called themselves the First Old Battalion. Even if they were a small soldier, they would always be arrogant when they saw the commandants or captains of other battalions on the road. As a result, there was a strange phenomenon in the Beiliang frontier army that outsiders could not understand. There was often a saying, "A captain in this life, a general in the next life." This meant that the leaders of the old battalions would rather be captains for their entire lives than be generals with a higher rank. If they wanted to be generals, they would rather be generals in their next lives. Removing the name of Hupong Camp meant that there would be no more Hupong Camp in the world. It meant that all of the efforts of the seniors who had died in battle and who had retired due to injuries would be wasted. In particular, the martyrs of the old battalions who had died in battle in other places would become lonely ghosts who would never be able to rest in peace in the eyes of the Beiliang frontier army. Yan Wenluan tilted his head and lightly spat on the ground. He still spoke in a lukewarm tone. "What kind of bullshit is this? Compared to those old battalions in Liang province, they're 10 streets behind." The old general left Xiaoguang City just like that. Huang Fuxi's expression was strange, but he could not leave Xiaoguang City for the time being. He could only silently send off this infantry commander to the outskirts of the city before rushing back to the city walls. Sure enough, no one had left. They did not move at all. Xie Qingshu and the other 2 were still kneeling with their heads lowered. He Zhonghui, who had always been good-natured and easy to talk to, suddenly had a frighteningly gloomy expression on his face. Lu Zhonghui, the deputy general of Xiaoguang City, as well as the commander of another old battalion, this middle-aged general with more scars than his son, was actually sobbing like an aggrieved child. Lu Zhonghui's cavalry blocking camp was precisely the old battalions that Yan Wenluan had single-handedly created. Back then, the roads in western Shu were rugged, making it unsuitable for the Su family's cavalry to gallop through. The cavalry blocking camp, which had already displayed its brilliance during the Battle of Western Rampart, had made even more contributions. They were known as the cavalry blocking camp. Even the vanguard general Chu Lushan, who had led a 1,000-man army into Shu, had not been stingy with his praise. Yan Wenluan's bullshit wasn't some sarcastic remark, but a slap to his own face as the commander of Beiliang's infantry. He Zhonghui suddenly placed his hands on the city walls. With his back facing everyone, he said softly, "How can he not be sad that Crouching Bao City is gone? In all of Beiliang, if old Yan doesn't feel sorry for Calabash City, who would feel more sorry for him?" Not only Calabash City, but all of the Yuzhou infantry were personally trained by him. Is he really willing to let our Yuzhou soldiers die before the Lu province soldiers? That's impossible. Right now, the tens of thousands of Lu province soldiers on the border of Yuzhou, as well as those from Liangzhou, including the locals of Liuzhou, and those who have taken root in Lingzhou, are all watching us. He Zhonghui took a deep breath and said sternly, "Send an order to Wanyi City. Tiger Pouncing Camp is to be stripped of its name. Lieutenant Sun Shu and the other captains are to be allowed to participate in the defense of the city. If they feel that this rebellion isn't enough to vent their anger, then fine. If they have the ability, then go and kill Wanyi General Yang Qiu. At worst, He Zhonghui, will personally lead the troops to quell the rebellion." Xie Qingshu clenched his teeth and said, "This general begs the great general to allow the soldiers of Tiger Pouncing Camp to redeem themselves. Give them a chance to take back their old name." He Zhonghui suddenly turned around and kicked the Sunrise City Lord away. "Do you think that Yan Wenluan is the only one who is angry at Wanyi City at such a crucial time? Do you think that the 600 Li urgent letter only told our great General Yan not to personally take the risk? Chu Lushan of the Protectorate General, our Lord Protector General has already said, if the soldiers of Yuzhou refuse to be controlled, although the war in Liangzhou is tense, we can still send out a few capable generals to defend the city. Listen, even Chu Lushan wants your in-laws to scram out of Wanyi City. So what if He Zhonghui, agree?" The infantry commander had already left. Although Deputy Commander He Zhonghui didn't immediately leave Sunrise City, he was so angry that his face was ashen. He quickly walked down the city walls. Huang Fushi, who was following behind He Zhonghui, asked, "Will it be too much?" He Zhonghui waved his hand and said heavily, "Our Yuzhou army isn't that delicate." Huang Fushi continued to ask, "Then what about the 200 or so ordinary soldiers who followed Tiger Pouncing Camp and wanted to leave the city? What about them?" He Zhonghui coldly said, "What's there to ask? Of course they will be dealt with according to military law. Immediately executed." Huang Fushi looked at his back and continued to ask, "General He, I'm asking about their family members in Yuzhou. What about them?" He Zhonghui suddenly paused. There was a long silence. Chapter 1384. Huang Fushi said softly, 200 or so people, this general will consider all of them to have died in battle. If Mount Qingliang and the Protectorate ask about it in the future, I will take responsibility. He Zhong suddenly turned around. Huang Fushi, what are you planning? Huang Fushi smiled but did not say anything. He Zhong suddenly narrowed his eyes and said slowly, Huang Fushi, to be honest, I really don't like you as a Yuzhou general. Even if you did me a favor this time, I still hate you. I've seen too many smart people like you. Huang Fushi smiled calmly. If I were really smart, shouldn't I just do things and not say anything? He Zhong suddenly smiled and turned to leave. He sighed softly. If the great general was still alive, even if he didn't come to Xiaoguang City, he would have made an appearance at the Protectorate and not be like this. Let alone people, we can't even see the shadow of our king of Beiliang. Huang Fushi wanted to say something but hesitated. In the end, he did not say anything. Half a day later, in Wanyi City, on a drill ground, the doors were tightly shut. All that was left was a battalion of uniformed soldiers. 2,726 people. They had all arrived. The old barracks attached the most importance to the old rules. Often, the number of people they had at the time of the establishment was the number of people they would have in the future. Apart from a few old barracks that had too few people at the time of their establishment, the vast majority of the old barracks had the same number of people. In the Beiliang army, apart from the great general Su Zhao's Su banner, there was only one other type of army that could raise a banner other than the Su banner. Back then, the Beiliang Protector General Qin Jibao could not raise the Qin banner. The current cavalry commander Yuan Suozong could not raise the Yuan banner either. However, the Lotus Seed camp could, the Horse camp could, the Partridge camp could, and even the old barracks that had the 2 Tiger Pounce banners flapping in the wind this morning could. However, from now on, they would be the same as the ordinary border army of Beiliang. They could not. The deputy general of Xiaoguang City and the lieutenant of the cavalry blocking camp, Lu Zhonghue Shu, personally brought a military order and a message to Wanhe City and the Tiger Pounce camp. As a deputy general, he brought the military order to Wanhe City's Master General Yang Tuo. The military order was to remove the name of Hupong Battalion. He then arrived at the Hupong camp as a lieutenant of the blocking cavalry camp. He did not enter the camp. At the entrance, he said a few words to Sun Shu, whose face was full of tears. First, I ask your entire camp to die in battle. When you see the seniors below, you can go kneel. On the martial arts field. Sun Shu stood at the front with an expressionless face. Beside her were 23 senior captains and 47 deputy captains of the old Tiger Pounce battalion. Many of them even raised their arms to cover their faces. Sun Shu said solemnly, "It is I, Sun Shu, who have let you all down. I have let down all the seniors who died in the Tiger Pouncing camp." Sun Shu pounded her chest with her fist. "I don't understand General Yan's military orders. I don't understand the first one, and I'm not convinced by the second one. I can't accept it from the bottom of my heart." Sun Shu rubbed her face and smiled bitterly. "But it's useless to be unconvinced. Could it be that our Tiger Pouncing camp is really going to mutiny and rebel in Phoenix Crane City like Great General?" he said. Sun Shu looked at those faces and said in a low voice, "I don't care if you have such thoughts or not, but if anyone dares to do so, I'll be the first to chop them to death. If you do, come out and fight me one-on-one. Become a lieutenant first." Sun Shu suddenly laughed. "You brats, I can knock down an entire group of you with one hand." In the crowd, someone suddenly shouted, "Lieutenant, if I kill a few more Beimang barbarians tomorrow, can General Yan return the title of Tiger Pouncing camp to us?" Sun Shu did not lie to these brothers and shook her head. Sun Shu suddenly shouted outside the martial arts field, "Yang Tuo, take your men and scram. I'm an old soldier of Yozhou's Tiger Pouncing camp, not a rebel. Tomorrow, if my brothers and I don't kill as many as 7,000 of you, I, Sun Shu, will be your junior. I'll be reincarnated as your son." Hearing the torrential curses from the martial arts field, Wanhe City's Master General Yang Tuo rubbed his ears and smiled bitterly at the 2 deputies beside him. "Don't worry. Let's go." However, before he left, Yang Piao shouted back, "Sun, remember this. If you don't kill as many as we do in the next few days, remember to be Yang Tuo's obedient son." Maldorf *Ker, the sound of swords being unsheathed could be heard from the martial arts field. Yang Tuo hurriedly left with his men. At this moment, Hong Jingyan's Ruan cavalry was the same as before. They were about to arrive outside Yuzhou City, but they were destined not to participate in the siege. Of course, this meant that Wanhe City, which was better equipped than Crouching Bao City, was about to welcome a battle to the death. Beimang had a total of 500,000 soldiers. In the commander's tent, a fat man was walking around the Beiliang sand table again and again. No one knew what this king of the south courtyard was muttering to himself. Fatty Dong walked to the sand table near the western region and stopped for a moment. He then circled to Jizhou and stopped again. When he saw the area between Beiliang and western Shu, he also stopped for a moment. Finally, he walked to the center of the table and placed his hands on the table. He said softly, "Once Crouching Bao City was conquered, the entire Central Plains must be cursing Beiliang for being a pile of shit and the Su family's iron cavalry for bragging." Dongzhuo habitually tapped his teeth. "I know you're definitely not hiding in Mount Qingliang. You have 3 choices. You can break through the western region of Lu province and deal with those monks on Mount Lantua in the western region. Or you can go to the border of western Shu and make a face-to-face deal with Qin Jibao and cut off some meat for Bailiang. Or you can go to the horizontal water Silver Harrier in Jizhou and help Yuzhou clean up the mess the new lord of Liang gave you. The fat man lowered his voice and muttered to himself. I don't care if you go to western Shu. If you go to Jizhou, those 20,000 low-level cavalry who didn't get any benefits because of Wei Jingtang will definitely not be enough. If you go to the western region, then it'll be a real headache. Do you think I can arrange for a governor or a general to personally lead an army of tens of thousands to wait for you there? Even if I'm willing, others won't be. Dong Zhuo began circling the table again. Why don't you throw a copper coin and guess if there's any words? That won't do. You can't play around with national affairs. That's right. Dong Zhuo, you're the king of the southern courtyard today. You have to be careful when you do things. Yes. That's reasonable. Huh? Why are you guys still standing there like idiots? Hurry up and give me a copper coin. When Huda City, the largest town in the northwest of Liang dynasty, was being bombarded by more than 1,000 catapults, the Bailiang Protectorate, which was not far from Huda City, was still operating quickly and orderly. The Protector General even had the leisure time to sit in front of a sand table that included the terrain of Yu River and Ji provinces, taking the time to pay attention to the battle that was about to unfold in Luanhe City. The Yuzhou army didn't care much about the movement in Luanhe City, treating it as a local general acting on impulse, but those who had the qualifications to stand in the main hall of the Protectorate knew that Protector General Chu wanted to kill. If not for the words of Su Weisheng, who had yet to leave this place, Chu Lushan really wouldn't have cared about whether or not Yan Wenluan would be humiliated. He would have already sent people to Luanhe City to take over the border. For this reason, the deputy commander of the infantry, Great Ancestor Gu, had already argued with Chu Lushan. Many other great generals, including Zhou Kong, had been forced to act as mediators. Chu Lushan stood in front of the sand table, his hands clasped together as he lightly patted the back of his hands. This wasn't just a matter of military talent. The position one stood in would also affect the way a general on the battlefield thought. General talent and commander talent only differed by a single word. They seemed to be very close, but in reality, they were as far apart as the clouds and mud. Su Weisheng sat on a chair, a thick blanket covering his knees. Yuan Zuozong was present, as was Qi Danghua. Chapter 1385. Interesting. Even though they had different surnames, they were still one family. Su Weisheng gazed at the sand table and said softly, judging from the losses we suffered at Hidden Bao City, even if Yang Yuanzhan's method is varied as Central Plains, they'll still be able to take down 150,000 or even more Beimang with only 40,000 men. After all, this battle will only get more and more difficult. However, the top generals on both sides are well aware that Xiaoguang City will be a turning point. After taking down Sunglo, once Yozhou's gates are wide open, Northern Mang will have even more tactical options. Whether it's a cavalry battle, a foot battle, besieging a stronghold to strike back at reinforcements, specifically targeting Yozhou's limited cavalry, or even directly abandoning Yozhou's cities and focusing on supporting their central line main army. Qi Danghua said softly, if only Beimang had taken the bait from the start and attacked Liuzhou with all their strength. Their supply lines would have been filled with holes. Su Weisheng shook his head. If they really wanted to attack Liuzhou, it wouldn't be a matter of supply lines anymore. Dong Zhuo and that peace magistrate have the ability to turn their supply lines into bait and lure us in. Yuan Zuozong nodded. With 1 million troops pressing down on the border, it can be said that half of Beimang's southern court is cutting off meat for the sake of smooth supply lines. In truth, it's not just the southern court that's bleeding heavily, mobilizing no less than 1 million cows and sheep. Orange and West prefectures have also been mobilized. Following Northern Court King Tuoba Bodhisattva's resolution, he's starting to lead his troops down Liuzhou. Beimang is basically using the power of the entire country to fight this fierce battle. Even if we want to launch a surprise attack, it can't be called a surprise anymore. Chu Lushan, who had been randomly looking around the sand table, suddenly stared at a certain spot at the mouth of the gourd and muttered to himself, "What if?" Qi Danguo couldn't understand at all. Yuan Zuozong was in deep thought, quickly weighing the pros and cons. Only Su Weisheng directly rejected the idea. "No, it's too risky. This is seriously contrary to Beiliang's original strategy." The confused Qi Danguo turned around to look towards Yuan Zuozong, who was also a great general's adopted son. The latter chuckled and said, "The true significance of the Calabash opening's existence, apart from the surface depletion of Northern Mang's military strength, has an even deeper special meaning. The Calabash opening is blessed by the heavens in terms of its territory, not only for Yuzhou, but for all of Northern Liang." At the time, foster father and Surly had prepared for the worst. If Liangzhou was breached, then there were three paths of retreat. The first was to lead the army back to western Shu, where they would sit in Shu and rely on Nanzhao. This was the best plan. Now, the second was to enter the western regions through Liuzhou, but this was the worst plan. After all, we did not have a stable foundation in the western regions. The third plan of retreat was to defend the west and north of Yuzhou to the death. If necessary, we could hold both Hezhou and Jizhou in our hands. Regardless of the feelings of the Liang imperial court, Beiliang would forcefully pull out another horizontal battle line. The key point of this strategy was to treat Calabash Mouth as Xiangfan's city of the Central Plains. Yuan Zuozong pointed at the mouth of the gourd and said slowly, "Lord Protector General wants to have a surprise battle at the mouth of the gourd. He wants me or General Zhou to lead the elite cavalry to the mouth of the gourd and swallow Yang Yuanzhan's army in the west. In this way, Liangzhou and Liuzhou, which were already lacking in forces, would become even more powerless. But if we were lucky enough to succeed, the risk would be great, but the benefits would be great as well." Su Weisheng said in a low voice, "There is no such thing as luck in the world. We can't afford to gamble, and Beiliang is not at the point where we have to gamble." Qi Danguo secretly revealed an expression of, "You're on your own." Yuan Zuozong smiled faintly. Chu Lushan thought for a while and said, "The worst-case scenario for Beiliang is to make Beimang hand over 600,000 soldiers, even if we have to risk everything. This is not difficult." If it was someone else who said this, even if it was Zhou Kong, the deputy commander of Beiliang's cavalry, he would be criticized for bragging to the heavens. But when it came from Chu Lushan, people were willing to believe it wholeheartedly. Chu Lushan, who had been crossing his fingers, slightly bent one of his fingers and pointed at the direction of Ji Bei. Wei Jingtang finally found his conscience and didn't abandon Transverse Water City. Because Transverse Water City is still there, Yuandao didn't degenerate to the point of using 10,000 Yuzhou cavalry to attack Silver Sparrow City, which was almost given to Beimang by Ji Bei with 20,000 soldiers. Actually, the current situation is not so bad. At least Gu Jiantang didn't yell at Beimang's westernmost border army, "Brothers, you should go and attack Yuzhou now. Don't always look at me affectionately. If you leave, I, Gu Jiantang, promise that I won't see anything." Also, that Emperor Zhao from Liang hasn't asked the Ministry of Revenue to allow Beiliang's people to change their household registration. He hasn't asked Hezhou and other places to open their doors like prostitutes, refusing to accept Beiliang's money and even paying for it. Yuan Zuozong coughed lightly. He also realized that it wasn't appropriate to say this in front of Su Weisheng. Chu Lushan chuckled, and the fearless Protector General hurriedly changed the topic. "I don't really know how to play chess. Well, if I play 100 games with foster father, I can still win 100 games." Qi Danguo rubbed his chin and smiled knowingly. After joking around, Chu Lushan continued, "Wei Jingtang and Transverse Autumn City are variables. We're just as unprepared as Beimang. Let's see who can seize the opportunity. Besides, His Highness is also there. This time, Su Weisheng flew into a rage. He directly called out his name and scolded, Chu Lushan. Did you eat a bear's heart or a leopard's gall? Qi Dangguo was given a fright and felt like he was falling into the clouds. Yuan Zuozong softly said, it's too risky. Even if His Highness leads the cavalry of the Hidden One Dao to break through the 20,000 Beimang light cavalry that traveled a long distance without any support, they might stop there. At most, they'll head west and fight a few small battles. But if we send out additional troops, we'll be forcing His Highness and the 10,000 Yuzhou cavalry to fight a major battle outside the mouth of the gourd. And right now, Hong Jingyan's Ruan cavalry has yet to move. The Yuzhou army is separated by half the mouth of the gourd. Even if our cavalry joins up with His Highness, it's still too risky. This risk is even greater than me leading an army to the mouth of the gourd to eat Yang Yuanzan. No. Chu Lushan uncrossed his fingers and raised his arm. He rubbed his eyebrows with his 2 index fingers as he stared at the mouth of the gourd. Do you think that I'm forcing His Highness? No, it's His Highness who's forcing us. Chu Lushan picked up a bamboo pole and fiercely poked the mouth of the gourd on the sand table. With a ferocious face, he said, His Highness wants to tell Yuzhou and Beiliang that during the war, he, the king of Beiliang, Su Fengnian, will be here. Su Weisheng seemed to want to stand up. After struggling for a while, he sat down quietly, closed his eyes, and bit his lips in silence. Yuan Zuozong smiled happily. He squinted his phoenix eyes and exuded a strange elegance. This was the first time he had not concealed his long-dormant sharpness since he became the commander of the Beiliang cavalry. Then let's do it. After Su Weisheng opened his eyes, he calmly looked at Beiliang Governor-General with a sharp gaze. Hui's city can be defended for 40 days. Su Weisheng looked at the 3 and said in a low voice, if we can't do it, none of our soldiers will be able to leave the border of Liangzhou. Chu Lushan snorted, at least. Before Su Weisheng looked at him, White Bear Yuan Zuozong only showed her his back that was already far away. After crossing the threshold, Yuan Zuozong, who always paid attention to his appearance, stretched himself and shook his neck. After doing all this, Yuan Zuozong quickly walked out of Beiliang Governor-General's house. On the same day, a cavalry of 10,000 quietly left the station. The 300,000 cavalry of Beiliang were the best in the world. And this cavalry was the Beiliang army. The Great Snow Dragon Cavalry. A cavalry of 6,000 showed up outside the mouth of the gourd. The leader was wearing armor, holding a spear and a cold saber. Chapter 1386. Before Su Fengnian met with Wei Jingtang, the general of Horizontal Water City, Yuandao's Yuzhou cavalry had already engaged the 20,000 Mang cavalry. The Mang cavalry was a light cavalry that was temporarily transferred from Gu Jintang's eastern front. Their original intention was to launch a swift assault and devour both Horizontal Water City and Gu Jintang Silver Harrier cities, which were isolated outside the Great Wall. With that, they would be able to squeeze the 10,000 Yuzhou cavalry into Ji Bei. At that time, the Yuzhou cavalry would run out of food and fodder, and the left wing of Beimang would naturally return empty-handed. However, because of the existence of Wei Jingtang and Horizontal Water City, the Yuzhou cavalry did not dare to recklessly march south. When their scouts found out that Silver Harrier, which was further west, was different from Hengshui City, they had already retreated as promised. The 2 generals, who were originally flying into a rage, calmed down and had a discussion. They came to the conclusion that they could abandon Hengshui City and occupy Silver Harrier, which would still be able to intimidate the Yuzhou cavalry to a certain extent. However, the opportunity on the battlefield was fleeting. After they stopped at the north of Horizontal Water City for a day, when their exhausted army of 20,000 charged towards Silver Harrier, they were ambushed by 5,000 Yuzhou cavalry from the side about 100 miles away from the border city. The two generals and Yu Wandao both knew that both armies were exhausted, and the key was to see who would snap first. When the Yuzhou cavalry learned that Silver Harrier had been abandoned, their deputy general suggested a quick return. It was at this moment that Yu Wandao's stubbornness was fully displayed. He insisted on fighting a fierce battle before Beimang obtained the two border cities, even at the cost of damaging the horses' stamina and causing a large number of cavalrymen to fall behind. Although the two deputy generals, who had a steady personality, disagreed with him, but the instinct of Beiliang's soldiers to strictly abide by their orders made the two generals unable to disobey Yu Wandao's bold decision. In the end, after the Yuzhou cavalry had marched for 500 miles in 3 days, they were gradually divided into 3 groups of cavalry. Yu Wandao, who had better horses and stronger cavalry, personally led the vanguard of 5,000 cavalrymen and finally arrived at the battlefield in time. Like a sharp arrow, they pierced right into the ribs of Beimang's army without any warning, completing their strategic goal of fighting a battle outside of Ji City. With the sudden intrusion of the Yuzhou cavalry, the Beimang cavalry was caught unprepared and brutally penetrated their formation. After that, the Yuzhou cavalry even broke the formation of the Mang cavalry, causing them to lose contact with each other. As the two flustered and exasperated generals were sent to Ji province, they must be the brave and valiant generals who were good at fighting on the eastern border of Beimang. Although the situation was not favorable for them, they were not going to just sit there and wait for death. In a battle where a large number of cavalrymen were involved, the death of several thousand men was not a small number. However, once the battle was turned into a pursuit by one side, the death of over 10,000 men would be considered a small number. As a result, the two generals who each led over 10,000 men decided to surround the 5,000 Yuzhou cavalry like dumplings. Although they were destined to win, the result would still be miserable. However, compared to the result of the Yuzhou cavalry killing over 10,000 men, it was definitely much better. However, the penetrative power and destructive power of Yuzhou's 5,000 cavalry left all of the northern Mang cavalry's 1,000 men commanders trembling in fear. In the 3 clashes, even though it could be said that Yuzhou's cavalry relied on surprise attacks to seize the advantage in numbers, more than 2,000 northern Mang cavalry died on the spot, this still left the northern Mang cavalry speechless. The elite cavalry armies on the Liang-Tu expanse's border that had experienced many battles only had this type of ability at most. Yu Wandao did not lead the 5,000 Yuzhou cavalry into a fierce battle. Instead, after a few successful assaults, he intentionally or unintentionally moved the battlefield further west. Both generals weighed the stamina of their own cavalry, and found that the gap between the two armies had a slight deviation in tactics. The cavalry at the back of the Beimang cavalry wanted to change their horses and fight again, while the cavalry closer to the Silver Harrier cavalry would chase after them. Actually, this deviation was based on the difference in the number of soldiers that both sides had sent into the battlefield. In fact, it was not a fatal mistake for the Beimang cavalry. Although the Beimang cavalry had suffered heavy casualties, there were still over 8,000 Yuzhou cavalry in front of them. With their decisive pursuit, not only could they catch up with the Yuzhou cavalry, they could also join forces with the cavalry at the back and fill up the gap, forming an absolute advantage in terms of numbers. However, when the second cavalry of over 3,000 Yuzhou cavalry arrived on the battlefield, it had messed up the Mang cavalry's plan. All the Yuzhou cavalry were light cavalry, but obviously, this cavalry had sacrificed time in exchange for better equipment. The 8,000 Beimang cavalry who were chasing after Yu Wandao's cavalry at the same level as the front line of Ji North were smashed by this Yuzhou cavalry. Like a fierce horse charging into a field of wheat, they reaped the lives of over 1,000 Mang cavalry in just a blink of an eye. On top of that, Yu Wandao's main cavalry had launched their assault at the same time. The 7,000 Yuzhou cavalry, whose morale was high, were now facing the 7,000 Mang cavalry who were covered in wounds and frightened by the mere twang of a bow. How could the latter fight back? On the other hand, the 10,000-man cavalry at the back were fierce and tough as well. They quickly turned their horses around, wanting to return the favor and cut the Yuzhou cavalry in half. But right at this moment, two more fresh forces appeared on both sides of the battlefield. Although their numbers were not large, the blow they brought to the Beimang cavalry's morale was immeasurable. One of them was the 2,000 Yuzhou cavalry who raised a banner with the character, Su, on it, while the other was the banner of Horizontal Water City. They were fewer in number, only 600 cavalrymen led by Wei Jingtang of Horizontal Water City. However, that northern man great commander at the back of the battlefield was already terrified to the extreme, naturally feeling the urge to retreat. Didn't this great one say that if this great one didn't lose a single soldier, he would be rewarded with great contributions? Now, he didn't even touch the walls of two cities, yet he was already beaten up so miserably. It wasn't that he couldn't save those several thousand cavalry, but after saving them, this great one could only return to being some damn 1,000-man commander. Therefore, the generals Hui Lilu, who was still fighting desperately on the battlefield, felt his heart turn cold. The generals who were drinking and chatting with him in his tent yesterday had run away just like that. Fortunately, Hui Lilu and his 600 personal cavalry charged north and tore open a hole. Afterwards, the Man cavalry continued to flee north. On purpose, Yu Wandao did not even look at Hui Lilu and the 3,000-man cavalry behind him. Instead, he gazed into the distance, staring at the other Beimang generals, Lang Xin, who was slowly retreating. He purposely left that hole. If Lang Xin and his 10,000 cavalrymen were determined to fight to the death, Yu Wandao's Yuzhou cavalry would only have 2,000 to 3,000 left. This was not because Yu Wandao feared a battle to the death. Otherwise, he would not have come to the north of Silver Sparrow Crossing Water to fight this battle. Instead, he used his Yuzhou cavalry to fight to the death against the 20,000 men that Gu Jiantang should have taken care of. This was completely meaningless to Beiliang. However, while it was meaningless to exchange one life for 2 or 3 lives, it did not mean that it was meaningless to exchange one life for 10 lives. That was why Yu Wandao purposely had Hui Lilu bring his 3,000 crippled cavalry that were in complete disarray to bring disaster to Lang Xin's 10,000 cavalrymen. Yu Wandao, who was known as the Pride of West Chu, after Chao Chongqing, risked universal condemnation and rushed to the dynasty's northwest alone. After entering Beiliang, he deeply understood what a border iron cavalry was, and he also had a comprehensive understanding of the Beimang cavalry. He knew that it was extremely difficult to beat the Beimang elites into complete defeat and then wantonly chase them down. However, if he could bring disaster to the north, then there would be a chance. In fact, Yu Wandao did not even need to make any specific arrangements. When he and his 800 cavalrymen took the lead in chasing after Hui Lilu's 3,000 cavalrymen, another 2,000 cavalrymen who were temporarily unkillable caught up with them. Together with the 600 cavalrymen from Horizontal Water City and the 2,000 Yuzhou cavalrymen who were the last to enter the battlefield, they all began to charge northward. After Hui Lilu brought his remaining cavalrymen and fled northward, Lang Xin, whose face was livid with rage, had the urge to slaughter all of them when he saw those bastards charging at him recklessly. However, when he saw those Yuzhou cavalrymen who took out their light crossbows and leisurely shot at Hui Lilu's cavalrymen, or when he sped up, he did not even need to exert any force with his saber. He only needed to borrow the momentum of his warhorse to lift up his saber and cut a large wound on the neck of the Beimang cavalryman. It was an easy and effortless move, but it was definitely enough to kill them all. Lang Xin roared and ordered his men to speed up their retreat. The 20,000 cavalrymen from Beimang had rushed to the battlefield of Ji Bei in a hurry. Although they were also riding 2 horses each like the Yuzhou cavalrymen, even though Lang Xin knew the consequences of being hunted down by an army of cavalrymen, he could only wish that his warhorse had 8 legs right now. When Hui Lilu and his personal cavalrymen caught up with the rear of Lang Xin's army, more than 2,000 of the remaining 3,000 cavalrymen who were lucky to break through the encirclement had been killed silently. In the 6 hours of long pursuit and escape, more than 2,000 of Lang Xin's cavalrymen were killed by the tireless Yuzhou cavalrymen. Like a cat catching a mouse, men from Beimang cavalrymen were dying all the time, and small groups of cavalrymen were breaking away from the main army and fleeing in all directions. Finally, before night fell, the chief general of Yuzhou cavalrymen, who had a handsome face, finally stopped his pursuit after personally killing Hui Lilu. Chapter 1387. The 600 cavalrymen from Transverse Water City followed the Yuzhou cavalrymen and collected military merits. Their main task at the border of Liyang was to defend the city. Although they had never participated in a war like today, where both sides had more than 30,000 cavalrymen, they had never stopped engaging in small-scale skirmishes. It happened every now and then. The Transverse Water City cavalrymen, who were known as the elite of Ji province, did not fall into a disadvantage. But who would have thought that killing Beimang barbarians was as easy as harvesting wheat in June and July? As the veteran soldiers of Ji province, which was also an important border area like Beiliang, the soldiers of Ji province had their own pride honed from years of fighting on the battlefield. Therefore, when they heard that Kai Nan, a general under Gu Jintang's direct command, appeared at the border of Beiliang with 60,000 cavalrymen and encountered Old Liang, who only brought 10,000 cavalrymen to the south, none of them dared to challenge him. It was said that Kai Nan was the first to kneel down, as if his knees were weak. It was as if he brought 60,000 cavalrymen to be inspected by Su Shao. This farce was widely spread in Ji province and the capital. But what the outsiders could not understand was that Kai Nan, who was given the title of General kneeling with 60,000, was not reprimanded by the Ministry of War. Even Gu Jiantang, who was in charge of the military affairs of Northern Region, did not seem to be dissatisfied. Kai Nan's official hat was still on his head. After this battle, Transverse Water City of Ji province finally understood that the 300,000 cavalrymen of Su family were collectively called the 300,000 cavalrymen of Su family. The real cavalry was about 120,000 cavalrymen, and the main force was in the north of Liangzhou. Among them, Yuzhou, who was mainly infantry, had less than 20,000 cavalrymen. Then, Su family casually let an unknown newcomer of Beiliang, Yu Wandao, lead 10,000 cavalrymen and killed 12,000 Beimang cavalrymen with less than 3,000 casualties. On the way back, the general of the 600 cavalrymen of Transverse Water City could not hold back his curiosity. He ran to the young General Yu, who was covered in blood, and carefully asked if the cavalrymen of Beiliang were all as sharp as his Yuzhou cavalrymen. Yu Wandao shook his head. That Transverse Water City cavalry leader felt relieved. Then, Yu Wandao smiled and said that the Liang province cavalry was much stronger than the Serene province cavalry. That old cavalryman from Jizhou, who thought that all 600 cavalrymen under his command were elites, immediately broke down. Finally, Yu Wandao said that there was a saying in the Beiliang frontier army that if the two Liao provinces of Beimang and Beiliang were counted, there might be more than 1 million cavalry in the world. But ultimately, there were only 3 types of cavalry in the world. The Beiliang cavalry is one type, and the other cavalry armies are the second type. The leader of the Traversing Water cavalry was completely puzzled. There's another type. Yu Wandao smiled and said, it's the cavalry that scared Kai Nan's 60,000 troops into kneeling down. There aren't many of them, only 10,000. The old cavalryman swallowed his saliva and dared not say anything. At that time, Yu Wandao lamented softly, your Jizhou doesn't understand, and neither does Liang, because the ancestors of the Zhao clan have burned incense. The leader of the Traversing Water cavalry dared not say anything. Around the 600 cavalrymen of Hengshui were the Yuzhou cavalry that remained silent regardless of whether they were fighting on the battlefield or returning victorious. After Su Fingnian, wearing the root-like mask, secretly met with Wei Jingtang, Yu Wandao, who was waiting outside Traversing Water City, personally accompanied Su Fingnian back to Silver Harrier. At this time, the Yuzhou cavalry had openly entered the city and taken over all military affairs. Sure enough, the battlefield was the best whetstone. Yue Wandao, who was previously only eye-catching because of his overly handsome appearance, was still extraordinarily handsome. However, there was already an iron-blooded and cold temperament on his body that was completely natural. Su Fengnian said softly, "The situation at Gourd Mouth in Yuzhou is not optimistic. 10,000 against 20,000. 12,000 killed and no more than 3,000 casualties. This great victory of yours is a timely reign. You can also remove that part of your title as a general. In the future, no one in Yuzhou will question your ability to lead troops. This battle between the two armies might even be regarded as a classic battle by future militarists." Yue Wandao said calmly, "But a victory like this that doesn't affect the overall situation." Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "Although the Liang Imperial Court will turn a blind eye to this and will even purposely suppress the situation in Jibei, this is good news for Beiliang. The defending army of Yuzhou also needs a victory like this." Yue Wandao frowned. "We don't lack war horses and provisions. However, only 6,000 of the 10,000 cavalrymen can mount an assault on Gourd Mouth. However, each of them can ride 3 horses. But the problem now is that not only does Beimang know our intention, they can also make countermeasures. I'm afraid that Gu Jiantang will continue to turn a blind eye to this. Besides, Wei Jingtang will soon lose his official position. Yuan Tingshan, who is in charge of Jibei, can even send the 6,000 private soldiers of Li family from Yanbao to defend against horizontal water silver harriers. When that happens, Wei Jingtang will have a hard time defending horizontal water city. The imperial court and Jibei will not give him this chance." Su Fengnian, who had been patiently listening to Yue Wandao, suddenly turned his head and looked at this young general with the least experience in the Yuzhou army. He smiled and said nothing. Yue Wandao, whose lips were dry and bleeding, turned his head. He thought something was wrong and subconsciously touched his face. Su Fengnian retracted his gaze and said with a smile, "Yue Wandao, Yuzhou needs a general like you who can win tough battles and also understand the rules of the imperial court." Yue Wandao hesitated for a moment, then said seriously, "I'm glad to see your highness in Jibei." Su Fengnian nodded and said, "Jibei is not Beimang's territory. Let Li Yang do whatever he wants. Too bad Wei Jingtang will never agree to return to Yuzhou with us, or I would have tied him up. If that's the case, let's take a short rest and recuperate. Then, we'll go to the mouth of the calabash." Yue Wandao nodded and said with a deep voice, "When the battle ended, I've already sent out 400 scouts. On one hand, it was to prevent those scattered Beimang cavalry from causing any trouble, and on the other hand, it was to keep a close eye on Gu Jiantang's eastern front. Judging from the news we've received in the past 2 days, Lang Xin's remaining troops have lost their determination to fight. They are only thinking about how to explain the crushing defeat to the general of Beimang's eastern front. Even if Beimang dares to send more soldiers into Jibei and give their warhorses an extra pair of legs, these barbarians will never be able to catch up with our pace." Yue Wandao quickly added, "But there are still a few famous generals in the eastern front of Beimang. The Emperor of Beimang has to go on a tour throughout the year, and according to the seasons, his royal tent is called Jibu. 4 young men from Beimang are given this honor. Tuoba Bodhisattva's eldest son is Chun Jibu, who has just become the leader of the Southern Dynasty's strategist. Zhong Shintong's son is Xia Jibu, the general of Yozhou's vanguard. As for the eastern front of Beimang, there are 2 Jibu, Qiu and Dong, who are outstanding generals that Hui Lilu and Lang Xin can't compare with. If one of them comes with an elite cavalry, it will be much more troublesome." Speaking of this, Yue Wandao, who always gave the impression of a cultured and refined general, could not help but curse, "Does Gu Jiantang's eastern army only know how to eat shit?" Su Fengnian could not hold back his laughter and said, "That's enough. Li Yang has always been like this. Don't expect any icing on the cake. No matter what we do, we always plan to hit them when they are down." Amidst the twilight, Yue Wandao nodded with a gloomy face. Late that night, Su Fengnian, who had never revealed his identity, received a spy report from Hai Dongqing. He asked Mi Fingjie to find Yue Wandao, who had yet to take off his armor and rest. He told him that Wugong City was breached by Bei Mang's vanguard in just one day. Yue Wandao hurried to a side courtyard of the Silver Harrier General's mansion where Su Fengnian was temporarily staying. Su Fengnian was sitting on a stone bench. When Yue Wandao came near, he raised his head and said, "We will depart tomorrow morning with the 6,000 cavalry. The other 1,000 or so soldiers who are more heavily injured will stay in Silver Harrier for the time being. Whether Bei Mang's reinforcements come or Yuan Tingshan's tripping, we will leave Silver Harrier and return to Yuzhou." Yue Wandao nodded. "This general will give the order immediately." Suddenly, a voice came from behind him. "I will accompany you out of the calabash." Yue Wandao turned around abruptly. His expression was extremely complicated. There was shock, worry, and even more joy. Su Fengnian waved his hand. Mi Fingjie waited until Yue Wandao left the courtyard before asking worriedly, "Your Highness, is this really appropriate?" Su Fengnian did not say anything. He closed his eyes and rested until dawn. At dawn, Su Fengnian opened his eyes. For some reason, Yue Wandao came to the courtyard with a heavy expression. He seemed to be asking for forgiveness, saying that the army might be delayed for 2 hours. Su Fengnian asked him what was the matter. Yue Wandao looked like he wanted to say something, but he did not. Su Fengnian frowned as he stared at the young general who shone brilliantly in the Battle of Ji Bei. Whether it was the rash advance of the army when they galloped for hundreds of miles, or the forced order in the army, or the timing and angle of the attack, or the freedom of the enemy's cavalry to escape from the battlefield, or the final pursuit that expanded the victory, the pride of Yu family had proven that even in Beiliang, where famous generals gathered, there was still a place for Yue Wandao. Since Yue Wandao did not want to say the reason, the furious Su Fengnian decided to follow Yue Wandao and see for himself. Su Fengnian, Yu Dilong, Mi Fingjie and Fan Shaochai, for riders, followed behind Yue Wandao and 2 deputy generals, 20 riders, led by a Yuzhou scout, galloped wildly out of the city toward the northeast direction for an hour. Chapter 1388. Along the way, there were villages and forts that were in a mess. Although this front line wasn't in the path of Bei Mang's 20,000 men, Hui Lilu and Lang Xin had lost close to 1,000 men after the battle. These stragglers would flee at the mere sight of 40 to 50 Bei Mang cavalry. However, the small villages to the north of the Hengshui River had suffered a calamity. The 600 Hengshui cavalry had been out in pursuit for the past few days, but after the initial panic, groups of 20 to 30 Mang cavalry continued to converge. Among them, there was a group of 200 Bei Mang cavalry that had clashed head-on with the Hengshui cavalry. Both sides had suffered heavy losses. Moreover, in the desert beyond the Great Wall, not to mention a few hundred or a few dozen cavalry, even if there were thousands or tens of thousands of cavalry, it would be like searching for a needle in a haystack once they left the city passes. When Yue Wandao's 400 elite scouts encountered the Bei Mang cavalry in the wilderness, they didn't take the initiative to attack. They were only responsible for gathering intelligence. The Mang cavalry dared to fight with the Hengshui cavalry, but when they saw the Yuzhou cavalry equipped with light crossbows and sabers, they took the initiative to retreat far away even though they had an absolute advantage in numbers. Generally speaking, they minded their own business. However, if the Yuzhou scouts encountered a small group of Mang cavalry and casually gained some military merit, neither Yue Wandao nor the lieutenant general had any objections. After all, why would they need a reason to kill a few more Bei Mang barbarians? However, the reason why Yue Wandao was so quiet today was because out of the 5 scouts, only one of them had returned to Silver Sparrow City to bring back the latest news. This news couldn't even be considered a military intelligence of any significance. That scout said that they had encountered 60 northern Mang barbarians in a village outside the city. According to the rules of the Northern Liang Scouts, each team would fight against one target. Their side only needed to send back information. Due to the great disparity in numbers, they would not have to bear the crime of retreating without fighting. Moreover, these Yuzhou scouts had just returned from further north. They weren't supposed to fight with the Beimang cavalry in the first place. They needed to return to the city immediately and pass on the military intelligence to the cavalry camp. Yu Wandao wasn't just angry at the captain for disobeying the regulations, he felt more helpless. In Beiliang, where military law was the most important, those 4 scouts might not even be able to keep the military merit they had earned. Yu Wandao didn't know how to report this to the king of Beiliang, who was in the Yuzhou cavalry. In the cool border army, retreating from battle, lying about military intelligence, and killing innocent people were the 3 capital crimes. However, disobeying regulations were also crimes. The vice-general of Yochi, Shi Yulu, glanced at the 4 strange riders behind the troop and whispered to Yu Wandao, "The 4 scouts must have died in battle. How do we report this?" Yu Wandao showed a rare pained expression. "Report it as it is." As the leader of the 400 scouts, if Fan Fen had heard such cold-blooded words before the Battle of Jibei, he would have long cursed and scolded Yu Wandao. But after the battle, all the soldiers of Yu province now had great admiration for Yu Wandao. Fan Fen whispered, "General Yu, can't you make an exception? How about we ignore their previous military merit and just report that they encountered a large group of Mang cavalry and 4 of them died on their way back to the south?" Yu Wandao didn't say anything. The cavalry galloped into the village near the river. The corpses of the villagers could be seen everywhere. The village, which should have had 40 to 50 families, was now completely deserted. Only a few willows with bent branches outside the village were spitting out a few patches of green in this early spring when all living things should be growing. On the wheat drying field in front of a cottage to the north of the village, they saw the corpses of a family of 5. 2 old men were hacked to death by the Beimang war sabers at the door. The middle-aged man who was supposed to go to the fields to sow wheat was still clutching his hoe after he died. His son's head was right in front of him. The young headless body was closer to his mother. The woman was stripped naked and raped by the Beimang cavalry. Her limbs were chopped off. The young scout sobbed and said, "The sergeant couldn't stand it and asked me to bring the military intelligence back to Silver Sparrow City. Then he said that he died in battle further north and asked me to ignore the 3 of them. I didn't want to leave, so the sergeant kicked me and said that all 5 of them died here. What should we do about the military intelligence?" On the wheat drying field, the cold blades and light crossbows of the 4 Yuzhou scouts were taken away. Their armors were taken away, and only 4 corpses were left. One of them died under the mud wall. The arm holding the blade was chopped off by the Beimang cavalry and placed on his head. 2 of them died on the wheat drying field. The sergeant's corpse was tied to a long bench and used as a target. His body was full of bloody holes caused by arrows. Yu Wandao, Shi Yulu, and Fan Fen didn't say anything. It wasn't that they hadn't seen crueler scenes. In the north of Beiliang, when was there not a year where one side didn't die? Which one of them hadn't collected the corpses of their fellow Beiliang soldiers? However, this wasn't Beiliang. This was Ji province. The old scout, Fan Fun, who could clearly call out the names of the 4 men, said softly with reddened eyes, "It's not worth it. You didn't die for anything." Then, Fan Fan saw the young man with the thick fur coat walking towards the sergeant's corpse. Fan Fan strode forward and wanted to push the young man away. "I didn't see you when we were fighting on the battlefield. Now that the war is over, you're still wearing a fur coat that the 4 of us who died in battle couldn't even afford in their entire lives. Why are you pretending to be a good person? I don't care which noble family you're from in Ji province." Fan Fan stretched out his hand and shouted, "Get lost. As long as Beiliang isn't completely wiped out, outsiders like you won't have the chance to collect our corpses." But Fan Fan suddenly realized that he couldn't push the young man away. Chapter 1389. The man crouched down with his back to the crowd and slowly loosened the cold rope around the corpse. He took off the fur coat and wrapped it around the corpse. Fan Fan angrily pulled out the cold saber at his waist. At the same time, even Shi Yulu began to pull out his saber. An old man gently walked to the side of the young man. Immediately, the entire wheat field was filled with a majestic and fierce sword aura. Yul Wandao said in a low voice, "Fan Fan, stop. Don't be impudent." Fan Fan was stunned. Yul Wandao's unwarranted obstruction made this man, who had been on the battlefield for 20 years, feel even more grief and indignation. The moment he raised his saber and charged forward, he saw the young man, after putting the fur coat on the corpse, grab his own face with his 5 fingers like hooks and peel off his face, bit by bit. He heard the man mumble to himself, "Yes, your deaths were not worth it. You died in Ji province, in a foreign land. Even Liang couldn't protect the common people. Why did you Yuzhou cavalry still care even though you knew it was death? You knew you were defying the Beiliang scouts' orders, but you still cared." The man gently closed the eyes of the scout who died with remaining grievances. He smiled bitterly and said, "If it were 3 years ago, I wouldn't have understood either. At that time, I thought only the heroes of Jianghu would help when they saw injustice. But when I really entered Jianghu, when I visited both Liang and Beimang, I realized that it wasn't the case. Even the heroes of Jianghu are not as stupid as you." The young man raised his head and looked at the only living person left among the 5 scouts. It was the young Yuzhou scout. He asked, "What are your names?" The young scout blurted out, "Fan Liao, Hu Zhonghan, Zhao Dian. I only know that the sergeant's surname is Liu. He never showed us his military plate." Fan Fan said, "Liu Qingqing. He's been in the army for 12 years. He started out as a crossbowman in Liangzhou. He should have been a marksman a long time ago. All these years, as long as he had a little military merit, he would give it to his brothers. And this kid, he's called Lu Tao. He's never been a coward." Not only did the young man, who looked like he came from an aristocratic family, help the corpse stand up, but he also used the rope to tie the corpse to him. He took the corpse off the horse, and the dead and the living rode on the same horse. He said, "Yul Wandao, take the 3 corpses back to Silver Sparrow City first. Lead the 6,000 cavalrymen and rush to the mouth of the gourd. I will be able to catch up with your army in half a day. Remember to bring an extra set of armor when you leave the city. Scout Lu Tao, you need to wait here. I'll help you get back the crossbow blade and armor. When the time comes, I'll let you bring the squad leader and those things back." As he spoke, the old, young, and young woman also mounted their horses. Yul Wandao looked at the man who was carrying the corpse of the sergeant on his back. Su Fingnian said softly, "I'll send Lu Qingqing off." The 4 riders galloped away. The killing intent of the 4 riders was so strong that even Deputy General Shi Yulu and Scout Captain Fan Fan felt their scalps tingle. Shi Yulu, who had no idea what was going on, could not help but ask after he carried a corpse on his back and mounted the horse, "General, what is this?" Yul Wandao was in a daze. He was born in the rich Jiangnan of the Central Plains. He had traveled to many places when he was studying. Throughout the year, he could hear the chatter of famous scholars, the sound of guqin in the forest, the laughter of brothels, and the sound of toasting. But only Beiliang, who fought to the death without words and mourned without sound. Yul Wandao pulled out the famous blade, Great Luan, and pointed to the south. "Please open your eyes and look at me, Beiliang." The cavalrymen quickly left the village. Fan Fan asked gloomily, "General Yu, who is that guy? Is he a big shot in the Liang dynasty?" Yul Wandao shook his head. "Other than Beiliang, who is worthy?" Yul Wandao laughed. Him. His name is Su Fengnian. Shi Yulu and Fan Fen, including all the generals of the hidden cavalry, were stunned. They suddenly felt as if sand had entered their eyes. Fan Fen suddenly turned his horse's head and shouted, "General Yu, I'll quickly tell Lu Tao." He said that the person he admires the most in his life is the person who single-handedly killed Wang Xianji. Lu Tao also said that he would never see him again in his life. "Let's see if he dares to believe me this time." A young captain suddenly said timidly, "General Yu, I also admire him. Otherwise, let me wait in the village for half a day. I promise I can keep up with the army. If I can't, I will cut off my own head." Yu Wandao glared. "Is your brain flooded with water? Next, His Highness will follow us to the mouth of the calabash. You can look at His Highness however you want, as long as you want. At that time, as long as you have the ability to follow behind His Highness, I won't stop you." The young captain thought that it was right and smiled awkwardly. In less than half a day, the four abandoned their horses and rushed over the desert, catching up to the 6,000 Yuzhou cavalrymen. When the 6,000 cavalrymen saw the young man in the lead, they all unsheathed their Beiliang sabers to show their respect. The four mounted their horses. Su Fengnian took the armor tossed to him by a young captain and put it on. It was unknown who was the first to shout those three words, but even Yu Wandao was cheering. "Great General!" Back then, on the training grounds at the mouth of Beiliang's calabash, Su Fengnian had made his first appearance in the border army, but at that time, he was only wearing a python robe. Thus, this was Su Fengnian's first time wearing armor to break through the enemy lines. He turned his head and seemed to see an old man riding side by side with him. Su Fengnian bit his lip and took a deep breath. When he looked again, all he could see was 10,000 li of yellow sand. He unsheathed his Beiliang saber and urged his horse to gallop. He roared, "Beiliang! Fight to the death! Beiliang! Fight to the death!" The 6,000 cavalrymen rushed out of the calabash with the resolve to die. Not only did they want to cut off that vast supply line from Beimang's southern court to the mouth of the calabash, they also wanted to completely destroy it. Chapter 1390. The weather in the northwest was high, and they arrived late. The 6,000 dark cavalrymen didn't march close to the border of Ji River. Instead, they drew a semicircle in the sky. If the northern defensive line of Ji River was a relatively flat and straight bowstring, then the dark cavalrymen would be the arm of the bowstring. Within the area covered by the bowstring and the bowstring arm, there were many groups of Beimang scouts who had left the calabash and were patrolling the area. Their purpose was to prevent the supply of the army from being ambushed by the dark cavalry who had ventured deep into the enemy's territory alone. This time, Yu Wandao was still using the forced speed of the cavalry, and they had advanced over 600 miles in 3 days. In the eyes of those laymen who only knew how to talk about strategy on paper, or the common people who had heard of the famous steeds in the northwest that could travel over 1,000 miles in a day, this speed was not considered forced marching. But, if they could see with their own eyes how worn out the dark cavalry was, and how nearly 100 warhorses fell limp or even died when the cavalry stopped, they would understand how difficult it was to travel such a long distance in a hurry, where they would most likely be thrown into the battlefield at the next moment. In the dusk, Su Fengnian was washing the noses of his warhorses at a water source where the winter snow had melted. This time, the 6,000 dark cavalry had a total of 15,000 warhorses, nearly 3 times per man. Over 400 warhorses had died during the journey, and almost all of them were Beimang warhorses seized from the battlefield north of Silver Harrier City. It did not mean that the Mang warhorses were weaker than the dark cavalry. In fact, it was the opposite. Although the Beimang warhorses were weaker than the Beiliang warhorses in terms of explosive force, in terms of physical strength, the Mang warhorses were actually superior. However, as Hui Lilu and Lang Xin, the 2 generals, were rushing all the way to Ji City, and in consideration of the general situation of the Eastern Front, they did not even have 2 mounts per man. Even though they had rested for a day before the battle and fattened up the horses with fine grain, it was still not enough to make up for the loss of their stamina. This time, the dark cavalry felt sorry for his wife, who had been with him for many years, so they deliberately rode more Baimang warhorses during the journey. They also favored one side over the other in terms of fodder feeding, and as a result, many of the Baimang warhorses died from exhaustion. Yul Wandao, who had taken off his armor and rolled up his sleeves, carefully washed the back of his mount. He smiled. Originally, we didn't need to run so many horses to death. If each person and 3 mounts were willing to split the effort fairly, at most 56 horses would have died. Su Fengnian looked around and smiled. This is also good. Starting tomorrow, there will definitely be continuous battles. Let's just treat it as conserving our strength. Our cavalry is obviously more familiar with the habits of the Yuzhou warhorses. A few hundred Baimang warhorses dying is better than many people dying on the battlefield. Yul Wandao nodded and said softly, Fan Fan's more than 300 scouts have been sent out. At most, there are 50 per unit, at least half a unit. After all, we have already started to encounter the Baimang Melanzi this morning. In order to prevent our whereabouts from being leaked, Fan Fan scouts must kill the enemy scouts as soon as they see them. Otherwise, if the Baimang Melanzi escapes, all our efforts will be in vain. I am very grateful that the prince is willing to send out 3 of his personal retainers to help Fan Fan's scouts. With them accompanying us, the chances of completely wiping out the Baimang Melanzi will be much greater. Su Fengnian smiled and said, that young woman is Fu Shui Room's Grand Master of the Profound Realm. The old man is a Sword Dao Grand Master of the Profound Realm. As for the child, his name is Yudilong. He is my eldest disciple among my 3 disciples. Yul Wandao joked, killing the Baimang Melanzi is a bit like using an arqueballista to kill sparrows. Su Fengnian shook his head and hesitated for a moment. He smiled, I won't say for now. Let's wait. In the future, Beiliang will give Baimang a little surprise. During this period of time, Su Fengnian was like the most ordinary Yuzhou cavalry. Not only did he not take away Yul Wandao's military power, he did not roam around like the other generals during several short breaks. He only acted as a temporary scout a few times, staying far away from the main cavalry to spy on the military situation. This time, the Yuzhou cavalry were all light cavalry. They abandoned excess supplies and reduced all items that would slow down the cavalry's speed. Except for a few generals who were equipped with spears and lances, all the cavalry were only equipped with a cold saber and a light crossbow. Those with outstanding strength could add a hard bow and 3 quivers of arrows. In the past few days, the army had maintained a column formation. When they entered the battle zone tomorrow, they would spread out horizontally in battle. In this forced march, the Yuzhou cavalry had opened the eyes of Su Fengnian, who had never entered the bottom level of the border army before. For example, the Yuzhou warhorses did not need to be pulled by the cavalry at all. They could follow their masters and move around. Even if they were temporarily stationed to rest, no matter how hungry or thirsty the warhorses were, they would always be within a few dozen feet of their masters. This meant that even if the Yuzhou cavalry were ambushed and the scouts outside did not have time to report, the 6,000 Yuzhou cavalry could still put on their armor and get into formation to meet the enemy in half an incense stick's worth of time. 3 feet of ice was not formed in a single day. The excellence of the Yuzhou warhorses had a lot to do with the saying, leaving Yang and Beiliang placed the most importance on horse management. A scout galloped back from the southwest. The one riding side by side with the scout was actually a young man with a tender face. His horsemanship was so good that he did not need to hold the reins. The way he held his hands in his sleeves was 50 to 60% similar to his master's. The scout commander ordered the more than 40 scouts under his command to dismount and rest. He and the boy named Yudilong rode to the side of the main general Yul Wandao and the great general, Su Fengnian. After dismounting, he cupped his hands and reported the military situation. It turned out that they had encountered 60 elite horsemen from a military town in Dragon's Waste province more than 60 li away. They thought it would be a fierce battle with heavy casualties, but they did not expect that the boy would take the lead. After breaking through the enemy lines, he jumped high off the horse and killed more than 20 horsemen with his fists in one breath. By the time the Yuzhou scouts pulled out their sabers and charged, it had become a one-sided chase. In one scene, while the thin boy was still in the air, he caught an arrow shot by a Mang horseman and stabbed it into the neck of the leader of the horsemen. He casually pushed the corpse aside, squatted on the back of the Bei Mang warhorse, and grinned at the scout commander who gave him a grateful look as he patted his horse. In the end, in this battle that should have been evenly matched, only 9 of the Yuzhou scouts were injured, and their injuries were not serious. At this moment, the burly scout commander could not help but reach out to rub the boy's head. Unexpectedly, the boy suddenly leaned back and dodged the scout commander's palm. The boy's feet were nailed into the yellow sand, and his body leaned back to the side. But he did not fall over, which immediately attracted a burst of cheers from the nearby Yuzhou cavalry. Su Fengnian looked at the boy who had been pretending to put his hands in his sleeves, and glared at him. "Stupid boy, why are you showing off the demeanor of a grandmaster? Stand still." Yudilong laughed and stood up straight again. Only then did the scout commander successfully rub the boy's head. Because his fingers and palms were full of calluses, although he tried to be gentle, Yudilong's hair was still messed up. The boy secretly rolled his eyes and then sighed like an old man. Afterward, the scout commander squatted by the water and casually washed his face. He glanced at the boy who was sticking his butt up and drinking water with his mouth and smiled knowingly. This little guy was really powerful. Not only did he easily beat a Bei Mang barbarian to death with one punch, but he also broke the warhorse's legs and caused it to fall to the ground. He also broke the boy's armor and body into 2 with a sweep of his arm. The scout commander sighed with emotion and turned his head to whisper, "Little guy, in the future, when you're on a battlefield where thousands of cavalry are fighting each other, you should take it easy. The northern barbarians' cavalry and archery aren't bad. Once you're targeted by them, they'll shoot you from all directions. It'll be very troublesome." Back in the day, our old scout commander Biao also had good martial arts skills. Back then, he was injured in the ribs by a few arrows from the side and became ill. Otherwise, he wouldn't have left the border army so early. Yudilong smiled brightly and nodded. "I knew that. Master told me before that it's difficult for 2 fists to fight against 4 hands. Killing the enemy with hundreds of cavalry is not the same thing as a battle formation with thousands of troops. Don't worry, my eyesight is very good. Besides, even if I don't have eyes on my back, I'll still be able to sense the murderous intent if there's a sneak attack from the rear. Besides, Master also told me that in Beiliang, as long as you break through the enemy's lines and charge forward, you don't have to worry about your back. If there's any danger, there'll naturally be fellow soldiers to block it for you." The scout commander asked, "Did the great general really say that?" The boy, who had drunk several caddies of water in one go and wasn't afraid of his stomach swelling, raised his head and grunted, "Yeah, right?" The scout commander, who was squatting by the water, rubbed his chin and sighed with emotion. "If you're not an old soldier of the border army, you wouldn't be able to say that. Right, big guy, what does fellow soldier mean? It's the people who are equipped with cold knives and crossbows and kill the barbarians together. But I don't have a knife or crossbow. A few days ago, I asked Master for one, but he wouldn't give it to me. Then what about me? Am I still a fellow soldier?" "Of course you are. Then big guy, why don't you give me a set of cold knives and crossbows? I'm dying of envy. If you're too stingy to give it to me, you can lend it to me." "Little guy, it's not that I'm stingy, but I can't casually lend my knife, crossbow, and warhorse to others. Otherwise, I'll be punished according to military law." Only when I retire from the army will I be able to leave behind a set of armor and a knife and crossbow. I'll give them all to you then. Okay. How long will it take? Talking to you is so boring. Forget it, Master said that I shouldn't bite off more than I can chew. I'll learn other things after I've mastered the fish technique. Sigh, but I really want to wear a knife on my waist like Master does. Hearing the boy's childish words, the scout commander laughed heartily. Udilong turned his head to look at Su Fengnian, who was standing not far away, and shouted with a pleading face, Master. When can I have my own cold knife? Big Guy already admitted that I'm his fellow soldier. You've only been drinking the northwest sandstorm for 2 or 3 days, and you already dare to call yourself a fellow soldier. Chapter 1391. Su Fengnian smiled and kicked the child's buttocks. Liang Longqian fell towards the surface of the water, but he didn't crash into the water. His hands were pressed against the surface of the water, creating 2 water trails. With a slight push of his hands, his body was upside down and he was still on the surface of the water. Soon, the second team of scouts returned to the army and reported the enemy's situation to Yu Wandao. The burly javelin commander quickly left. Su Fengnian nodded with a smile. Udilong quickly slapped the water surface and jumped back to the shore, following the burly javelin commander to continue his scouting mission. The sky gradually darkened, but the Bailiang cavalry definitely did not dare to march in the night. There were many people in the southern army of Liang who suffered from night blindness. However, in the various border armies, not to mention the Bailiang cavalry who were proficient in night battles, even the Liao and Ji provinces rarely suffered from blindness. On one hand, the supplies in the border towns were better than in the interior of the dynasty. On the other hand, the selection of soldiers at the border, especially the cavalry, was targeted. Of course, in the middle of the night, if they only relied on the illumination of the torches in the northern Liang border army regulations, the advancing speed of the cavalry would inevitably be greatly limited. In addition, unless it was a specific battle with a clear objective, the cavalry generals would avoid it if they could. The 6,000 cavalry moved through the yellow sand like dragons. Under the curtain of night, Su Fengnian suddenly asked, Yu Wandao, have you thought about this? We are far from Ji province's Silver Sparrow Hawk and Horizontal Water City, and the opening of the gourd is even blocked by Northern Mang's army of 90,000. Even though we can still sustain ourselves through battle, using Northern Mang's supplies to sustain ourselves, it is destined that each battle will become more and more difficult to fight. When the time comes, the battle situation will be unfavorable, and Northern Mang will eventually form an encirclement. When we are at the end of our rope, Udilong and I will be able to leave if we want to, but you and your 6,000 cavalry might not even be able to die in the gourd. Yu Wandao smiled calmly. No wonder your highness doesn't want to get close to those Yuzhou cavalry. Are you afraid that as the king of Bailiang, you will see their last moments before they die? Actually, great general, you don't have to be like this. Ever since the day we set out, we already knew what our fate would be. These soldiers might not have read much, or even never read a book. However, after years of war, none of them are stupid. It's not like there aren't any who don't want to die in Ji province. Due to various reasons, more than 1,000 people left. Some were afraid of death and used their connections to get in through the back door. However, there were also some who were forced to leave because they were the only sons of their families and were too young. Yu Wandao's expression was exceptionally calm as he slowly breathed in. However, since we've come, we've already accepted life and death. Even if we were hesitant before the battle, we can't be cowards on the battlefield. Afraid of death? Of course, there were. However, how long would it take for the cavalry to charge when the two armies were in a stalemate? If one's limbs went soft and they were afraid of death, they would really die. After one charge, he would die very quickly. After the charge, those who didn't die would see their comrades die one by one behind them. They would just lie there alone on the battlefield and naturally wouldn't be afraid of death. This is how war is. Ever since our Bailiang great general left Liaodong, we've been injecting energy into the Su family's cavalry. We've been honing them for more than 30 years, almost 40 years, just to nurture this energy. Yu Wandao turned to look at Su Fengnian. His expression was solemn and sincere as he said in a deep voice, most importantly, be it the Su family's cavalry or the Bailiang cavalry, no matter how many people died in battle or how many defeats we suffered, we've always won in the end. Even if only a few hundred of us are left standing on the battlefield, we've never been afraid that no one will collect our corpses after we die. The only ones we need to be afraid of are the enemies pointed at by our Bailiang's blades. Su Fengnian was silent for a long time. Then, he smiled and asked, "You're the eldest grandson of the Yu family. Don't you feel that it's awkward to say our Bailiang?" Yu Wandao seemed to be stunned for a moment. Clearly, he had never thought about this question before. He lowered his head and glanced at the large one blade at his waist and the cold blade at his other side. When he raised his head, his eyes were especially clear as he said slowly, "When I first arrived in Bailiang, of course I wasn't willing to consider myself a Bailiang citizen. Later on, I don't remember when I blurted it out. But since I don't have the slightest impression of it, I think it should be a matter of course. I, Yu Wandao, like the scenery of the northwest Great Desert from the bottom of my heart. It's desolate, vast, and magnificent. Being in it makes one feel small. Even the smell of horse dung in the army camp will be liked after a long time. It's not like the prosperous cities in Jiangnan where no matter how good the wine is, one will feel nauseous after drinking too much. No matter how expensive the rouge on a beauty is, one will feel disgusted after smelling too much. I, Yu Wandao, have been raised by my parents and my family. I can only let them down in this life." Speaking to this point, Yu Wandao removed the great wand blade from his waist, one of the world's top weapons. He lightly tossed it to Su Fengnian and said with a smile, "If I really die in battle outside the mouth of the gourd, it'll be difficult to collect my corpse. In the future, Your Highness can just place this blade in my cenotaph." "Oh right, Your Highness, other than the cenotaph, I also want a piece of the forest of steels behind Mount Qingliang." Su Fengnian tossed the priceless great one blade back to Yu Wandao and said with a bitter smile, "Put it away for now. Even if there's a slim chance of survival, as long as it's not a situation of certain death, don't lightly talk about collecting my corpse." At the end of the 3 in the morning, the sky had not yet turned green and white. A group of phantom cavalry scouts galloped over. The platoon leader and Mi Fingjie, whose sword sheath had long been torn off, were respectively at the front and back. The platoon leader reported to Captain Fan Fun, 40 li to the northwest. Based on the brightness of the torches that the Baimang army often marches at night, there are about 2,400 cavalry escorting a large group of provisions south. The number of warhorses is about 2 men and 3 riders. Fan Fan said to the main general Yu Wandao and his deputy general Shi Yulu, "Other than 2,400 cavalry soldiers, there should be no less than this number of auxiliary soldiers and civilians." Probably because he was afraid that Su Fengnian was not familiar with Baimang's situation, Fan Fan added a few more sentences and explained, over the years, when Baimang raided the south, they would wantonly conscript the grassland tribes. If there were 100,000 cavalry on an expedition, they would usually bring no less than 200,000 troops and millions of cattle and sheep. Half of the southern dynasty would be cleared out. It was different from what the people of the Central Plains imagined. During Yonghui's reign, every time the Baimang cavalry broke through Jizhou, unless they completely passed through the entire Jizhou and entered the hinterland of the Central Plains, they never had a supply line of provisions longer than 500 li. After a battle, they could quickly return to resupply. Furthermore, their auxiliary soldiers were completely equal to most of the soldiers of Liang other than the border army, or even stronger. This was because as long as they were given a bow and a horse, they could become regular cavalry at any time. In history, there were many battles that happened in Jinan. Those Liang troops who tried to sneak attack the supply line all suffered great losses because of this. Therefore, this time, we should at least calculate it according to Beimang's 4,000 or even 5,000 cavalry. Su Fengnian did not say anything and listened attentively. It was Shi Yulu who coughed, and Fan Fan quickly shut up. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Captain Fan, I've been to Beimang before and seen with my own eyes how they transport supplies. I have some understanding of their combat strength. Right now, I'm just a normal cavalry soldier. I only care about charging and breaking through enemy lines on the battlefield." Deputy General Su Wenyao had a disgraceful expression on his face. He pointed his horse whip at Fan Fan and scolded with a smile, "Scram to the side. Aren't you worried that you'll delay the military plan with your chattering? When our prince was learning the art of war from those generals, you were still playing in the mud with your crotch wide open." Fan Fan scratched his head in embarrassment and urged his horse to leave. He did not need Yu Wandao and the other generals to order him to investigate the military situation. He personally led the scouts and went forward. When the warhorse had already galloped half a li, this captain finally realized that something was wrong. He, Fan Fan, was already a man in his 40s. Logically speaking, when he was playing in the mud, his prince was not even born yet. When Yu Wandao gave the order to prepare half the army for battle, the order was passed down quickly and accurately. The 6,000 cavalry immediately entered a state of readiness for battle. Compared to all the other armies in the world, the Beiliang army had one thing that many people could not understand. They already had the greatest combat strength in the world, but they still made a fuss over minor details year after year. This was especially true after Chen Jibao became the Protector General of Beiliang, where they had reached the point of perfection. Thus, in the Liang imperial court, there was once a civil official who mocked a certain place. Even the Protector General had to care about where the latrines were built in the barracks. Did that mean that they had to follow the rules when they took a dump? In reality, it really was a coincidence. After the Beiliang army set up camp during the war, they really did have to manage the latrines of the soldiers. When they ate, drank, and slept, there were detailed rules related to it. Even if there were rats in the barracks, cicadas in the summer, snow in the winter, and other small things, they all had to be strictly investigated. If one said that the Beimang were a race on horseback, they were natural warriors. Then the 300,000 soldiers of the Beiliang border army were battle maniacs who had been trained bit by bit. From the commanders and captains to the minor captains, everyone knew what they should do and what they should not do when war came. They did not need to think about what to do. Everything would become natural. This was because the rules and regulations that had been beaten down countless times were deeply imprinted in their bones. As for those higher official titles, it was very simple. They represented military merit. Chapter 1392. Beiliang's army had always been fair in its rewards and punishments. For example, corruption might have long been a common occurrence within the borders of Liang. Beiliang did not dare to say that corruption was completely forbidden. Far from the borders, the families of generals and soldiers would not be lenient when it came to taking money. However, in the border army, once it was verified, even if one had embezzled a few taels of compensation, the military law bureau would go forward and behead the officials in public. The superiors of the embezzling officials would be demoted 3 ranks and demoted. Beiliang's Daoist strategist, Li Gongda, had privately said something profound. If the descendants of generals and soldiers in Lingzhou viewed wealth as their lives, they would have gone mad from poverty. However, Beiliang had never been stingy in its rewards for military service. After beheading a few people, they would be promoted on the spot. When they returned to receive their rewards, they would open chests filled with shining silver in the barracks and take it on the spot. The border army had a large group of courier riders in charge of transporting the silver away from the border. When Su Shao conquered the imperial palace of northern Han, the first thing he did was to open the national treasury and distribute the silver. At that time, a certain Jiao Si, who was in charge of supervising the army in Liang dynasty, kindly reminded him to be careful of impeachment in court. At that time, Su Shao only said one thing: if you eat it, you can only poop it out. Whoever wants it, I'll take my soldiers and squat in front of their door. Of course, the 6,000 Yuzhou cavalry would not swarm forward as soon as they heard that there was prey 40 li away. Yu Wandao's order was for half of the army to attack. When the 6,000 cavalry advanced 30 li under the lead of the vanguard, who was in charge of choosing the route, the 6,000 cavalry began to change horses at the same time. Dismounting and changing horses was almost completely silent. 3,000 cavalry began to advance slowly with a single horse. The remaining 3,000 cavalry were not in a hurry to attack, but they were divided into 1,000 cavalry in the middle and 1,000 cavalry on the left and right flanks. Nearly 10,000 idle horses were temporarily restrained by these 3,000 cavalry who were biding their time. The sky was just beginning to brighten. At this moment, the 3,000 cavalrymen were less than 5 li away from Beimang. Northern Mang wasn't completely blind either. The several groups of horses they sent to the east had pretty much all died. Even though the few cavalry that made it back couldn't even figure out how many soldiers the enemy had, Northern Mang army had specialized, truth listener soldiers under their command. Even though the answers they obtained weren't too accurate, they wouldn't go so far as to say that several thousand cavalry was only several hundred. As soon as they heard that at least 2,000 enemy cavalry had appeared, the two Kiliarchs were shocked. They quickly set up a cavalry line across the north and south. The auxiliary troops, as the second wave, hurriedly mounted their horses, ready to enter the battlefield at any time. The Battle of the Western Wall in Liang and Dechu had been at odds with each other for several years. From the initial 70 to 80,000 against 100,000, in the end, both sides had exhausted almost all of their national strength to hundreds of thousands against hundreds of thousands. There were constant casualties, and constant reinforcements. During this period, both sides had used countless brilliant and tragic battles. Among these battles, there was a principle that later generations of military strategists were taught. In a battle where the difference in strength and morale between the two sides was not great, the side that staked everything from the beginning and did not know how to let elite troops make the final decision at the crucial moment would often lose miserably. The reason why Chen Jibao was able to stand out and become the only young general who was on par with the four famous generals of the spring and autumn period in terms of military achievements and reputation was precisely because, in his hands, he had fought time and time again in the classic battles where the enemy was at a disadvantage but slowly turned the situation around and then turned defeat into victory. Moreover, in any battlefield where he had the advantage in military strength, he had never lost. The two armies faced each other from a distance. The battle lines had already been pulled apart to what they thought was the best width. When the two Kiliarchs saw that banner, they no longer had any wishful thinking. It really was that word. Su. No matter why these 3,000 cavalry would appear outside the mouth of the gourd, they were truly the Beiliang cavalry. The Beiliang cavalry advanced in an orderly manner. Kill. As if they could not endure that suffocating feeling, the 2,400 Beimang cavalry began to push their warhorses to their maximum explosive power, taking the lead in a rapid charge. The roars of the Beimang cavalry rang through the clouds. On the other side, the two deputy generals of the Yuqi cavalry who had not yet truly charged suddenly spurred their horses. While charging forward, they slightly shifted their direction. After approaching the cavalry at the center of the front line, Shi Yulu laughed loudly. "I am honored to be able to fight side by side with the great general." Su Wenyao also said, "What General Shi said is what I was thinking." That cavalry did not say anything, only smiling and nodding his head. Near this cavalry, a blank space seemed to have appeared in the cavalry formation. This was the order of the main general, Yu Wandao. When the two deputy generals returned to their original positions, Yu Wandao pulled out his cold blade, raised it high, and lightly waved it forward. Charge! There were none of the heart-wrenching roars of Beimang. There was only the sound of blades being pulled out and horse hooves. Although the 3,000 Yuzhou cavalry were silent, the eyes of each cavalry were filled with an unswerving determination and passion. We have never fought side by side with the great General Su Shao. But we have now. In the future, the Beiliang Frontier Army will envy us like how we envied those lieutenants and generals. Even though we might not have the chance to personally witness their envy. But, there are no buts. Let us fight to the death outside the mouth of the gourd. The two armies passed by each other. Saber against saber. The remaining 2,600 Yuzhou cavalry did not even turn their horses around, charging straight at the 2,000 Beimang auxiliary cavalry. In the blink of an eye, 2 Beimang Kiliarchs were dead. Half of the 20-some centurions were dead. Of the 2,400 cavalry, nearly 900 had died. And then, just when they were hesitating whether to continue fighting or abandon the auxiliary soldiers and supplies, the 1,000 Yuzhou cavalry charged from the distance. On the left and right flanks, there were 1,000 cavalry that brazenly charged into the battlefield. They were not given a single path of survival. They could only fight with their lives on the line. All the surviving centurions were shocked and in disbelief. Although they were not the elite cavalry of the border towns, these Beiliang cavalry were only the light cavalry of Yuzhou. How could their first charge be so disastrous? 2 hours. Chapter 1393. 6,000 dark horsemen had killed 5,600 Beimang soldiers, including their cavalry. Under the interrogation of torture, they learned that there would be another 1,200 cavalrymen escorting the provisions 150 miles to the north. Then, they silently selected all the 5,000 Yuzhou cavalrymen who were not injured and began to rush north. In fact, 5,200 dark horsemen had survived, but they were all heavily injured. They would turn back the way they came and head east, finally heading south at the river province border. But everyone knew that even if it was the safest journey east, there would still be people rushing to the stables after smelling the stench of blood. Keep up with the main army. This was a battle of stampede. Once the cavalry found it difficult to even travel, they would only be a burden. If this was the case after one battle, then what about the second and third battles? This Yuzhou cavalry would become more and more overwhelmed and would only cause more of their fellow Yuzhou soldiers who could have killed more Beimang barbarians to die. The leader of the 200 horsemen was a heavily injured lieutenant. It was he who had volunteered to take the wounded east, and Yul Wandao did not refuse. The man who had killed 400 Mang cavalry by himself did not say anything. The captain looked to the north and grinned. "Brothers, we're counting on you." A burden. That's right, the 200 or so of us are just a burden. What's there to be embarrassed about? This daddy really doesn't have any more barbarians to kill. If only there were. Dying in battle is better than dying on the bumpy road. The more we can die, the better. Suddenly, a horseman broke away from the cavalry formation and galloped toward them. It was the young woman beside that man. She looked like a delicate and pretty woman, but not long ago, this lieutenant's scalp went numb when he saw her kill. She carried a medicine box on her back and said calmly, "He asked me to send you to River Province." The 200 horsemen were dumbfounded. The lieutenant roared, "We don't need you to care about us. Just kill 200 or 300 Beimang barbarians for this daddy and we'll break even." She glanced coldly at the lieutenant. "You're quite loud. Looks like you won't die anytime soon. If you have the guts, go ahead and shout at him. Also, the only thing that can make me go back is his order and you have to defeat me. But with just you." The lieutenant's face turned red. If this daddy hadn't taken 6 blows. She pursed her lips and asked, "So what?" The lieutenant swallowed his words, and his aura weakened a little. "I still can't beat you." Fan Shaochai said calmly, "Don't worry. He asked me to pass a message to you." Bring them back to Serenity Province alive. As for killing the barbarians, he'll make up for your share and mine." At this moment, the sound of a horse falling off came from the cavalry. Someone had died. Fan Shaochai glanced at them. "Just take the corpses with you. With me here, as long as you don't face more than 500 riders, it doesn't matter how slow you go." The captain dismounted from his horse and quickly walked to the corpse before squatting down. A horseman whose left leg had been torn open and casually bandaged was squatting beside the captain and the corpse. His injuries were relatively light and he was riding on the same horse as his comrade who had fallen off the horse. He held the reins with one hand and used the other to support his comrade, but he still couldn't stop him. It didn't matter whether he had fallen off the horse or died on the way back. The horseman raised his arm and wiped his eyes, sobbing. Before he fell off the horse, he said that he hadn't killed enough Beimang barbarians in this life and that he would reincarnate in our Beiliang in his next life. Fan Shaochai tilted her head and raised it so that no one could see her eyes. "Grandpa, Dad, it's not shameful for you to lose to this kind of Su family cavalry." Farther north, Yu Wandao said angrily for the first time, "Is it time for me Fingjie to leave after the next battle? And the next battle will be Yudilong. Then what will you do?" Su Fengnian nodded. Yu Wandao was about to speak. Su Fengnian turned to the commander and said calmly, "I'll stay here until all of you are dead. If the Beimang can even keep me here, then they'll be able to do it." Yu Wandaozhen was truly enraged. He had never been so angry in his life. "Motherf *Ker, I can't beat you." Shi Yulu said in a low voice, "Prince." Su Fengnian smiled. "I know what's important and what's not." Before coming to Ji province, Huangfu Jin had already reminded me. "Don't worry, I still stand by what I said. As long as the king of the northern courtyard doesn't come here personally from Lu province, it's not difficult for me to leave. Besides, most of the Beimang Qi refinement warriors are dead, but we still have the Guanyin sect in Beiliang. Now, I can know where Tuoba Bodhisattva is, but he doesn't know where I am. Even if there's danger, I can get the news in advance. Besides, if Tuoba Bodhisattva wants to come here, he has to go through two obstacles. One is Su Yanbing, and the other is the Wu family cavalry and swords." Yu Wandao snorted. Su Fengnian looked into the distance and suddenly said softly, "I'm sorry." Yu Wandao, Shi Yulu, Su Wenyao, Mi Fingjie, Yu Dilong, and the dozen or so cavalry nearby all fell silent. Then, Yu Wandao, Shi Yulu, and Su Wenyao began to hum a song at the same time. Brilliant Beiliang spirit-suppressing song. Sending off our comrades. Farewell. Yudilong had never heard of this song, but he began to hum along with them with a sobbing tone. He finally put on his cold saber. A set of iron armor was tied tightly to the horse's back. It was the one he had taken from the corpse of the big scout. Until now, Yudilong still didn't know the big guy's name. His master had asked him to bring it back to Yuzhou. Yudilong pursed his lips and wiped them hard. He gripped the saber hilt tightly and choked, "Big guy, before master chased me away, I promised you something. I wasn't bragging. Yudilong, will definitely do it. I'll kill 1,000 Beimang barbarians." There was a sad song between heaven and earth. It spread to the 5,000 Yuzhou cavalry. They began to hum together. They were going to die so generously. There were millions of households in Beiliang. How many of them were wrapped in iron armor and withered bones? Scholarly honors were paid with a pot of wine. How many emperors, kings, generals, and ministers were there? Good men, don't say that the heroes of the world have fallen into my trap. Little girl, don't hide your admiration deep in your belly. Come, come, come. Let's see who's beating the beauty drum. Come, come, come. Let's see who's the Yang realm's butcher. Come, come, come. Let's see who's going to fight for the throne with me. Chapter 1394. The 3,500 dark cavalry quickly left a battlefield strewn with corpses. Behind them were waves of thick smoke from the burning of provisions. This was already the 5th time the dark cavalry had helped Northern Mang light up the smoke signal outside the gourd. 14,000 Beimang soldiers and auxiliary soldiers had been killed, and nearly 200,000 cattle and sheep had been scattered. The northernmost part of the Phantom Cavalry's tracks was actually already in Longyao province. Then, they quickly headed south. In the battle just now, the Phantom Cavalry had not taken the initiative to attack, but Beimang's interception. Beimang had used the lives of 2,000 ordinary Phantom Cavalry soldiers to determine the location of the elite Phantom Cavalry, thereby reducing the Phantom Cavalry's room to maneuver. It was likely that the main cavalry forces of Longyao province would soon hear the news and move. While retreating, Yu Wandao suddenly raised his head and saw 2 birds chasing each other in the sky. At the same time, Su Fengnian pulled out an arrow from his quiver and pulled the bowstring back like a full moon. The arrowhead slowly deviated as the Gerfalcon and Beimang peregrine falcon soared. When the peregrine falcon was forced to lower its altitude to flee for its life, Su Fengnian shot out an arrow and killed it on the spot. The great inertia knocked the peregrine falcon into the clouds, and the extraordinarily handsome 6-year phoenix soared into the sky. Under everyone's gaze, the Gerfalcon pierced through the clouds and charged towards Su Fengnian. Its 2 claws hooked onto the peregrine falcon's body and gently tossed it down. It circled a few times above its master's head before disappearing in a flash. Su Fengnian tossed away the peregrine falcon's body and put the arrow back into the quiver on the left side of his saddle. The light crossbows were of excellent quality, but after a great battle, heavy crossbows often couldn't bear the burden, still easily damaged in large amounts. Even though the light crossbows the underworld cavalry carried were more durable than heavy crossbows, after 5 cavalry battles, regardless of whether it was the crossbow itself or the crossbow bolts, there weren't many left. That was why they had no choice but to switch out the Northern Mang cavalry bows they obtained after the battle. Su Fengnian and Yu Wandao both used iron bows with heavy Western shoe craftsman's imprints. Yu Wandao looked around worriedly. If it weren't for the fact that they could use battle to support battle, or even if the Beimang cavalry didn't come to surround them, his cavalry would have already collapsed. Previously, when they ran for 500 li from Ji province, it wasn't that the cavalry couldn't withstand it. Even though they had 2 horses at the time, the warhorses were still in a miserable state. Long-distance raids pursued speed and the element of surprise. However, since it was long distance, the cavalry could rely on their perseverance to hold on, but the warhorses couldn't. Especially since it wasn't autumn and the horses weren't fat enough. Beiliang's horse management officials weren't immortals, so they couldn't change this reality. Later on, after a short rest, they rushed for another 600 li to the outside of the gourd. Fortunately, they had captured Beimang warhorses at the time to minimize this invisible battle damage. However, after 5 consecutive large-scale cavalry battles with short intervals, even if the warhorses could still be rotated, at this stage, the cavalry, who were rushing from one battlefield to another at top speed, couldn't hold on any longer. As for why they didn't show any signs of fatigue, Yu Wandao subconsciously glanced at Su Fengnian beside him. Yu Wandao withdrew his gaze and turned to look at the faces around him. This young commander was filled with pride. For 10,000 phantom cavalry to fight to this extent, even with Yu Wandao's cold temperament, it was enough to make him proud. Killing more than 14,000 enemies was not strange. The cavalry that Beimang sent to escort the supplies were all second- or third-rate fighting forces in the border towns of the southern court. 2 of the cavalry battles, from the beginning to the end, had been a one-sided slaughter. However, the supply line between Longyao province and the Gourd Pass had been mostly paralyzed, and in the end, they had involved at least 10,000 of Beimang's elite cavalry and had been led around in circles by several thousand cavalry. This was the greatest achievement of Yu Wandao and the Phantom Cavalry. As the cavalry headed south, Su Fengnian, who had been escorting the wounded Phantom Cavalry away with Fan Shaochai and Mi Fingjie, said softly, "We've pulled our bow too tightly." Yu Wandao nodded. "Right now, the difficult part is finding a place to stop. Since the two young commanders in the east known as the Zhuobo and Zhuobo have also set out, it's no longer possible for us to retreat east. Besides, His Highness has also said that our spies have already shown that Yang Yuanzhan has ordered Hong Jingyan to lead half of the Ruren cavalry out of the Gourd Pass to block our path south." Yu Wandao looked to the west. "Go west." That was the northern front of Liangzhou province, where the Beimang's main force, commanded by King Dong Zhuo of the southern courtyard, was currently attacking Huda city. Both sides had a total of 700,000 soldiers. If they went there, they would be walking right into the northern Mang barbarians' trap. Not to mention the remaining 3,500 cavalry. Even if they had 35,000 cavalry, without the support of their own army, they wouldn't be enough for the northern Mang barbarians to wrap up dumplings. Even if Yu Wandao encountered the two Zhuobo or Hong Jingyan's Ruren cavalry, even if all the Phantom cavalry under his command were to die in battle, he would not go west. Su Fengnian also looked to the west, seemingly waiting for someone. Su Fengnian was waiting for the leader of the horse bandits, Song Jiao. This 1,000-strong horse bandits had been secretly recruited by Huang Fujin. While they might not be able to change the overall situation in Yuzhou, they could at least give Yu Wandao's Yuzhou cavalry a breather. The Phantom Cavalry was like an exhausted martial arts grandmaster. If they could get a breath of fresh air, they could still fight. If they could not even get a breath of fresh air, they would be completely exhausted. The reason why Su Fengnian did not say this was not because he wanted to give this cavalry a surprise, but because he did not dare to have too much hope for Song Jiao, whom he had only met once. If not for the fact that there were Beiliang experts hiding in Song Jiao, his horse bandits, Su Fengnian would not even have let Song Jiao, lead the way. Putting himself in Song Jiao, shoes, it was the same no matter who the horse bandits chose to side with. Beimang currently had the upper hand. If Song Jiao, wanted to rebel and used the 3,500 Yuzhou cavalry as proof of his allegiance, Yang Yuanzhan, who had been tormented badly by Yu Wandao's cavalry, would probably not be stingy with a single general. In Su Fengnian's view, it would be strange if Song Jiao, who had been born into a landowning household of the Southern Dynasty, did not have any ulterior motives and stood on Beiliang's side from beginning to end. As for what the truth was, Su Fengnian could only judge after meeting with Song Jiao's messenger. If Song Jiao did not dare to come personally and was not in the group, then Su Fengnian could only regard this chess piece as having changed its colors. Then Yu Wandao and the Phantom Cavalry, who had nowhere to run, were fated to fight to the death with the two great Jinbo cavalry or the Ruren cavalry. And Su Fengnian would go alone to find Song Jiao. Since he could have Beiliang and Huang Fujin bring the horse bandits outside the pass to Song Jiao, to dominate, then Su Fengnian could personally take it back. Rather than give hope and then disappoint, it was better not to say anything at all. Su Fengnian asked, "How many of Fan Fan's scouts are left?" Yu Wandao said bitterly, "Originally, there were less than 60 old scouts. Behind them, more than 800 cavalry have taken their place, barely maintaining the number of 400 scouts. Therefore, it can be said that Captain Fan's losses are the greatest. There is nothing that can be done. Fighting outside the pass, as a scout, he will definitely die at the very front." Yu Wandao pursed his cracked and bleeding lips, a smile appearing on his face. He said in a hoarse voice, "However, we have not fought these battles for nothing. Compared to before we left Yuzhou, the battle strength of the 3,500 cavalry has increased greatly. As long as we can breathe a sigh of relief, we can completely recover. Against the Ruren cavalry of the same strength as Hong Jingyan, we dare to say that we can win. Before this, Hu in Yuzhou, which was only known for its infantry, would have such thoughts. If these 3,500 people can return to Yuzhou alive, it will definitely be of great benefit to the entire Yuzhou war. Deputy General Shi Yulu and Su Wenyao both had subtle expressions, not daring to speak. They were afraid that Su Fengnian would misunderstand the main general's words and misunderstand that the Ruren cavalry was complaining about their awkward situation. Yul Wandao suddenly laughed and said cheerfully, "After this mess, not only will the Dragon's Waste, Hishi, and Tangerine prefectures suffer great losses, their vitality will also be greatly damaged. I'm afraid that the northern grasslands will also continue to lose meat. Those big factions that Tuoba Bodhisattva had suppressed with great difficulty might start to stir again. They originally had objections to attacking Bailiang first. In the eyes of these fellows who would not act until they saw the hare, who would be willing to attack a place that only had hard bones and no fat meat? How could it compare to attacking the Ji prefecture that had no military strength? As long as they passed Ji prefecture, it would be the rich central plains with thousands of miles of fertile land. Countless gold, silver, and people would be snatched until their hands went numb. Otherwise, attacking the two Liao prefectures would be fine too. As long as they could defeat Gu Jiantang, they would be driving south and besieging the city. Not to mention how many enemies we have killed on this trip to the Calabash Mouth, we can definitely make Dong Zhuo and the Taiping Commandery, who insist on attacking Bailiang first and then attacking the Central Plains, gnash their teeth in hatred. Perhaps they are stomping their feet and cursing at us right now. Chapter 1395. Su Wenyao lowered his head and checked the arrows in the quiver one by one. They were all made of dense hardwood and the arrowheads were very heavy. However, compared to Bailiang's arrows, there were still some slight differences. However, on the whole, they belonged to the same type of arrow. These two were like close relatives, and could be said to be two completely different types from the many bows and arrows in the Liang border. The latter focused more on shooting range, shooting speed, and adhered to the 3 strikes before facing the enemy in ancient military books. This was not because the latter had taken a different path. It was just that the battles in the interior were mostly infantrymen versus infantrymen, so the speed of advancement was naturally slower than the cavalry charge. As for the former, even if Liang Mang's arrows were supported by the outstanding strength of the northern warriors, they still only sought the 4 words, death by breaking armor. In fact, the Beimang cavalry did not embark on this extreme path in the beginning. It was only because of the 20 years of confrontation that they were seriously affected by the superior armor of the Bailiang. Otherwise, with Beimang's superb horsemanship and archery, they could often exhaust the enemy to death like flying kites when facing most of the other Liang border army. Su Wenyao casually threw away 2 arrows that had cracks on their shafts. After hearing the main general Yul Wandao's humorous words, he laughed softly and raised his head. He said, "Those Ziches are not really stupid. They know that if they don't take down Bailiang, all their talk about going south from Ji province and conquering the Central Plains and fighting all the way to Tai and city is fake. How many people do we have? We've already made their supply lines chaotic. If the entire Bailiang border army is left unattended, what will happen to the southern dynasty? Perhaps even the Beimang palace will be destroyed by us." However, logic is logic. As individuals, they all hope to do less and gain more. If the Beimang bigwigs want to attack Ji province and Liaodong, Su Wenyao can't wait for so many of them. How many fewer people will die in our Bailiang? Shi Yula nodded and said in a low voice, "Fatty Dong and that Taiping order really deserve to die." The chief scout officer Fan Fan suddenly arrived on horseback, reporting the military situation to the officers. 30 li to the south, there are 800 cavalry. Their armor is even better than the northern Mang cavalry we encountered before. They should be the vanguard that withdrew from the Gourd. From the looks of it, if we continue to head south, we will encounter 2 or 3 more of these small cavalry groups at most, and then we will encounter the Ruren cavalry very quickly. Yul Wandao put on a fake smile. His handsome face was filled with the viciousness that had been accumulating for a long time. He said ferociously, "Let's not care about the Ruin cavalry first. It's a waste not to eat the bait. Let's eat these 800 cavalrymen first." 2. When fighting an enemy force of only 800 riders, there were ways to fight 800, and when fighting 8,000, there were also ways to fight 8,000. Right now, Yul Wandao didn't have more than 3,500 hidden cavalry, so everything had to be done in a proper manner. It was because in the end, hidden cavalry's enemies, apart from the northern Mang cavalry on the surface, were also hidden cavalry themselves. Yul Wandao had to take into consideration the stamina, spirit, warhorses, and crossbows of his own soldiers. Now, the phantom cavalry's sense of archery had reached its peak. However, if they continued fighting for too long, it would also lead to irreversible side effects. This meant that the phantom cavalry could only fight a three-pronged battle. They had to quickly finish off the enemy with the least number of charges, quickly withdraw from the battlefield, and quickly enter a safe area to rest and reorganize. After receiving the military intelligence from Fan Fun, the main force of the phantom cavalry began to slow down. The front line was divided into 3 layers. Su Wenyao, who was bottom in the previous battle, led 1,000 cavalry in the front. Yul Wandao led 1,000 cavalry in the middle. Shi Yulu's 1,000 cavalry escorted a large number of horses to bring up the rear. Fan Fun's 400 scouts, who had the most horsepower, began to attack first. They circled in front of the left flank to prevent any stragglers from escaping. What Yul Wandao wanted to do was to use the advantage of numbers to split up the multiple charges that were equivalent to launching at the same time, trying to take away the 800 cavalry with 3 brushes. Unless it was absolutely necessary, he would not let his subordinates charge back and forth. The warhorses of the phantom cavalry could not hold on any longer, and so could the tenacious cavalrymen. They had given up on the heavy weapons that were more powerful but cumbersome, and mainly used sabers to fight the light cavalry. Even though both sides were prepared to die, there would not be too many corpses left behind at the line of death where both sides met. However, under the order of Yul Wandao, apart from the battle outside Silver Harrier City in north of Ji, in all the other 6 battles, big and small, outside the mouth of the gourd, the light cavalry of Yuzhou were ordered to kill during the charge. The price of such an order was to kill and be killed. Only a few of them were lightly wounded, but many of them were severely wounded. The most secretive and cold-blooded part of Yul Wandao's strategy was that, besides the fact that it was easy for the phantom cavalry to secure the victory right from the beginning, there were not many wounded cavalrymen who left the main force after the battle and retreated to the east. Shi Yulu and Su Wenyao were well aware of this, and so were the captains and officers. However, no one objected to it, and no one questioned it. No matter how soul-stirring the poems from the frontier fortress were, they could not describe the cruelty of the battlefield where everyone was forced to commit suicide. Each man of Yuzhou cavalry rode 3 horses. Which of the warhorses did not carry the sabers of their fallen comrades? Regarding this kind of extra burden, no matter how cold-hearted Yul Wandao was, and no matter how strict he was about the details, he could not bear to control it. Outside the battlefield where the killing had yet to begin, a group of 5 Bemang cavalrymen rode in the opposite direction of the 800 cavalrymen. They were rushing south at top speed, trying to send the important information to the main force in the south that they had encountered the Yuzhou cavalry. Suddenly, an inconspicuous little black dot that had bypassed the main battlefield appeared from the rear flank. This figure was running as fast as thunder, much faster than the warhorses. He made a semicircle and blocked the path of the 5 cavalrymen. Both of his feet stepped on the yellow sand and kicked up a cloud of dust. The 5 cavalrymen were stunned by this strange scene. 100 paces in front of them stood a thin and weak child with a Bailiang saber on his back. When he was 20 steps away from the leading horse, the child who appeared and disappeared mysteriously had already dodged 4 arrows. He leaped high into the air and caught the last arrow that was aimed at his chest. He punched the warhorse's head with his fist. The warhorse's head exploded and its front legs were broken. The warhorse was almost flipped upside down by the punch. The squad leader jumped in front of the warhorse, but his chest was hit by the child's fist. He directly knocked the warhorse behind him out of the way. The third rider's throat was pierced by the child's arrow, and he fell off his horse and died. The two squads on the left and right who had dodged the attack did not dare to continue fighting. They spurred their horses and charged forward. The child turned around and ran wildly. He caught up with a cavalryman and grabbed the tail of a warhorse with both hands. His feet steadied, and the galloping warhorse's hooves came to a halt. Its tail was broken, and it neighed in pain as it desperately tried to speed up. The child rushed out with a single step, standing shoulder to shoulder with that warhorse. With a casual sweep of his fist, he struck the warhorse's abdomen, sending the Northern Mang scout on its back flying along with the warhorse. That scout, whose feet didn't leave the stirrups in time, fell to the ground and was forcibly knocked to death by the warhorse's back. The child's figure did not slow down at all. He quickly caught up with the last cavalryman, who was trembling in fear. He bent down, grabbed the horse's hind legs with both hands, and twisted his feet on the ground. The warhorse's hooves were off the ground, and it spun in a circle in the air before it was thrown out. After the cavalryman was thrown off the horse, he struggled to stand up. The child came in front of him, pulled out the Bailiang saber from his back, and stabbed it into the Bay Mang barbarian's heart. After pulling out the saber and putting it back into the scabbard, the child said calmly, "Big guy, this is the 379th one." Later, Commandant Fan Fun and the 400 scouts saw this scene from afar. They did not come forward to say anything. Instead, they began to form a formation in the north. After Fan Fan helped the child bring a warhorse, he patted the Bailiang saber on his waist and laughed softly, "Little general, why don't you take my saber after I die? I'm not greedy. When the time comes, you can help me kill 50 Bay Mang barbarians." Udilong jumped onto the horse's back and stood with his saber in his sleeves. The child who was covered in blood rolled his eyes. Nowadays, the Yuzhou cavalry liked to call this child called Udilong Little General. 2 days ago, Udilong was supposed to escort 60 wounded riders to the east under Su Fengnian's arrangement, but the child refused no matter what. Even though Su Fengnian's face was angry, the child was still holding the warhorse with one hand, which had the big man's relic on it, and the northern cold saber on his back. He did not say anything, he did not want to leave either. Later on, it was a lightly injured officer who took the initiative to leave the main force, personally escorting the wounded as they retreated. Before leaving, he joked with this little general who had slaughtered his way through several great battles, telling him that he would just treat it as owing him 50 Northern Mang barbarians. Only then did Su Fengnian tacitly agree to let Udilong stay. The child probably really respected Su Fengnian, his master. Even if he stayed in the army, he did not dare to appear beside Yu Wandao and the others. One man and one horse hung alone at the tail of the cavalry and never spoke to anyone. Other than going out with Fan Fan scouts to spy on the military situation, he always silently followed behind the army alone. On the main battlefield, the 800 Bay Mang cavalry were almost completely wiped out after 3 charges. The 70 to 80 fleeing cavalrymen were also completely wiped out by Udilong and Fan Fan's 400 scouts. All the Bay Mang cavalrymen who were still alive were finished off by the Yuzhou cavalry who were cleaning up the battlefield. Su Fengnian stabbed a Northern Mang centurion to death with his iron spear, whose eyes were filled with resentment before he died. He lightly raised his head and looked towards the west. More than 10 riders who were watching the battle from the other side of the river appeared in the distance. Su Fengnian's heart sank. He did not see that familiar figure in his field of vision. Chapter 1396. Su Fengnian patted his horse and dragged his spear forward. Just as he and his horse were about to cross the battlefield, a young Bay Mang cavalryman fell at the edge of the battlefield. His neck had been cut by a cold saber during the charge, and blood was flowing out. The dying young cavalryman raised his arm and tried to lift the Beimang's saber. Su Fengnian glanced at him lightly. He did not hand over his spear and continued to urge his horse forward. But soon, not far behind him, two phantom cavalrymen knocked their bows and shot arrows at the same time. One arrow pierced through the Beimang cavalryman's saber-wielding arm, while the other pierced the young barbarian's cheek from the side. The dozen or so cavalrymen who came with Su Fengnian were all wearing armor, but their styles were messy. They did not look like they were from the regular border army. Most of them had a strong bandit aura that could not be concealed. The leader of the cavalrymen was still shocked when he saw Su Fengnian up close. He climbed down the mountain and dismounted, not daring to reveal Su Fengnian's identity. He knelt respectfully and said, "I, Hong Piao, am late. I cannot atone for my late arrival." Su Fengnian nodded and said, "Get up." Hong Piao stood up and said in a low voice, "Song Jiao, is already on his way. He has more than 1,200 cavalrymen under his command." Before he came, there was a setback and more than 300 people were purged. Among them, 4 of the Beimang spies were dug out. Su Fengnian did not comment. He smiled playfully and said, "Dug them out." Hong Piao did not dare to speak. This middle-aged man, who was not very tall and honest, lowered his gaze. He did not even dare to breathe loudly, but his eyes were burning. Hong Yu was once the second guest minister who had trained the private cavalry of Mount Hui. Later, he parted ways with the first guest minister, Huang Fangfua. The latter was still a wild swallow who was unwilling to fly into the palace of the emperor and minister. Hong Yu, who was more ambitious, joined Beiliang's army and hoped to make a name for himself on the battlefield in the northwest. Unfortunately, he was never put in an important position. Later, under Huang Fu Jin's instructions, he infiltrated Song Jiao's thieves' lair. He was both an assistant and a surveillance officer. Su Fengnian's realm dropped greatly, but his eyesight was still there. Hong Piao and Huang Langfo had been stuck at the door of Master Realm for many years, but they couldn't break through the barrier and couldn't improve. Then, like Mi Fingjie, they were lucky enough to meet the great year of the Jianghu and finally reached the first grade. Hong Yu was now a true first-grade Vajra realm martial artist. He was only one step away from the Finger Xian realm where one could ask for immortality with a light tap of the finger. However, it was not accurate to say that it was a great year for the emergence of dragons and snakes in Jianghu, because too many great grandmasters had died in the past few years. Just in the Liang dynasty alone, there was Wang Mingyin, who was ranked 11th in the world, Li Chungang, the sickly tiger Yang Taisui, Song Nianqing of the Sword Pool, Han Xingxian of the Human Cat, Lu Hao of the Capital, the Dragon Tree Monk of the 2 Zen Temples, Xia Lingjin of the Spring Invitation Cottage, and so on. These outstanding top masters left the banquet one after another. It was not as simple as making room for others. There were many mysterious changes that involved fate and fate, such as Wang Xianji's generous gift to Yu Dilong and someone in western shoes, usurpation, after the death of the Dragon Tree Monk. Someone from the group of horse bandits behind Hong Yu clicked his tongue and said in a strange tone, "Chief Hong, I just found out that your name is not Hong Biao but Hong Yu. You still treat your brothers as outsiders, don't you think you've lost your place as a hero? Why? Are your knees weak after seeing Beiliang's General Yu?" One of the leaders of that Song tribe mounted bandit clearly mistook the young military general on the back of the horse to be Underworld Cavalry's main general Yu Wandao. After all, for such a young border army general to be able to command 10,000 men, regardless of whether it was in northern Mang or northern Liang, even if he couldn't be said to be extremely rare, he could still be counted on one's fingers. For most of the horse bandits around Songjiao, they only found out about the inside story after the unexpected and bloody incident. They were not disgusted by the fact that their mother's family was part of the Northern Liang army. When they became horse bandits, who would not recognize their own family when they killed? It did not matter if you were surnamed Su from the Northern Liang or Murong from the Northern Mang or Yelu from the Northern Mang. Whoever gave them money and good horses, whoever was generous, would be the boss. But if it was said that they had some good feelings, it was pitifully little. Hong Yu, who was very utilitarian, was willing to be Su Fengnian, the leader of the Bailiang cavalry. During this period of time in Songjiao, or his bandit lair, he put the big picture first and endured everything silently. He had long suppressed his anger. When he heard the small leader who was not even Songjiao, or his confidant talking in his ear, his killing intent rose. Just as Hong Yu was about to smash the poor guy's skull with one palm, Su Fengnian stretched out his iron spear and patted Hong Yu's shoulder. He smiled and shook his head at him. Su Fengnian looked into the distance. Songjiao, or his cavalry, was about to arrive. At this time, Yu Wandao, Shi Yulu, Fan Fun, and Liulong's 4 horsemen also rode their horses over. They did not pay much attention to these horse gang bandits even though they were wearing armor and carrying swords. On the contrary, Fan Fun, who used to be a scout, was somewhat ashamed. Previously, he had only focused on killing in the battle formation and had actually missed these motley crew of riders. The senior commandant with evil intentions stared at these guys with gloomy eyes. Who was the best at cheating on others at the border? It was not a large group of horse gangs swallowing up a small force, but the Bailiang frontier army used these horse gang bandits as training targets. This was similar to the Bailiang scouts going to the refugee land to kill people to train and become crossbowmen. This was especially true for the Rouge army, which was a terrifying heavy cavalry once they put on armor. Usually, when they had nothing to do, they would go out of the pass with light armor and light cavalry. They liked to scatter into groups of 100 to search for horse gang bandits outside the Great Wall. They did not carry cold swords or crossbows, but all carried iron spears. That was not all. The other Wei Xiong army had a popular catchphrase even in the southern Beimang dynasty. It was called, "Fatten up and then kill until the end of the year." It meant that every time the Wei Xiong army received information from the Bailiang crossbowmen, if there were not more than 1,000 horse gang bandits, they would not pay attention to them and would deliberately raise a tiger to invite calamity. However, once they received information that there were more than 1,000 horse gang bandits, they would randomly pick a day before the end of the year and march straight in to kill all of them. When Su Fengnian appeared alone, the few horse gang bandits behind Hong Yu did not feel much and dared to put on airs. However, when Yu Wandao and his 4 horses stood side by side, the natural gap between the horse gang and the Bailiang frontier army was immediately revealed. Su Fengnian said softly to Yu Wandao, "There will be 1,200 horse gang bandits appearing soon. Although we are allies in name, it is hard to say if there will be any accidents. Bring 1,000 ghost riders over first, and we will plan for the worst." Fan Fen was eager to try and secretly swallow back the honorific prince that was at the tip of his tongue. He shouted with all his might, "The 400 men I have are enough. It was not easy to kill in the first place. My brothers are itching to kill." Yu Wandao did not act on his own. He looked at Su Fengnian and the latter smiled and nodded. Fan Fen did not need to give any orders. When he raised his arm high and made a gesture of gently clenching and unclenching his fist to the west, the 400 scouts immediately surged forward like a tide. This clearly showed that he was showing off his strength, causing the dozen or so horse gang bandits outside of Hong Yu to involuntarily retreat. Yu Wandao glanced at these horse gang bandits, who were fine in small-scale battles, but would be difficult for large-scale cavalry. He came to Su Fengnian's side and gave him a questioning look. Su Fengnian explained, "The horse gang is very familiar with the territory outside the mouth of the gourd. They can provide a place for our army to rest and reorganize." Yu Wandao heaved a sigh of relief and said happily, "If these bandits can really succeed, I dare not say anything else, but even against the 10,000 Ruren cavalry, our 3,200 cavalry will not only be able to recoup our losses, we will definitely have a surplus." An hour later, more than 1,000 cavalry came whistling from the distance. With the arrival of the main force of Song Jiao, or his horse gang, the dozen or so cavalry behind Hong Yu grew bolder. Among them, the more impetuous and violent ones even dared to glare angrily at the 400 Yuzhou scouts. Of course, this was already the greatest boldness they could muster. As for actually drawing their swords against the scouts, that was something they would not dare to do even if they were given a few more guts. In this period of time, the entire Liangmang border was rumored to be crazy and valiant. The horse gang, who paid the most attention to their keen sense of smell, naturally would not miss out on this matter. They set out from Yuzhou to the northern part of Jizhou, and finally rushed all the way to the north of the mouth of the gorge. The young generals called Yulwandao had beaten the 10,000 Ruren cavalry of Beimang down to only 3,000 to 4,000. Among the enemies they had already fought, there were the two senior generals on the eastern front of the Beimang, the Huguan, Changyu and Binglu, which were the three major military towns on the border of Longyao province. Moreover, they were about to face the hunting of the two Jabo generals in autumn and winter. Hong Jingyan would personally lead 10,000 Ruren cavalry north to intercept them, and they would also have to deal with the Tachun Jabo urgently rushing from the west to the mouth of the gorge. Of the four Jabo generals, other than Xia Jabo, who was still on the grasslands, and Yelu Yuhu, a member of the imperial family, the other three were all people who had the potential to become Beimang great generals. It was just a matter of who could reach the top first. All of them had come for Yulwandao's head. There was also a rumor that whoever could wipe out the Yuzhou cavalry would be able to bring Yulwandao's head to the western capital of the southern court to have an audience with the emperor, becoming the second Beimang great general after Dongzhua to be able to raise an unlimited number of private armies. When the 1,000-some horse gangs saw the 400 Yuzhou scouts in front of them, they quickly reined in their horses and cursed out one after another. Su Fengnian said to Hongyu, "You and I will go together." As the two rode forward, Su Fengnian calmly asked, "Mount Qingliang sent a total of 6 experts. You only know the identities of 3. Of the 3, how many died?" Hongyu replied, "Only one died in battle after falling out with the spiderweb spies. This general received orders from Yozhou's General Huangfu not to reveal my identity too early, so I did not act. But this general secretly intercepted and killed 16 riders who snuck out of the horse gang's lair. They were all Beimang barbarians." Meanwhile, Yulwandao had quietly returned to the battlefield. Chapter 1397. Song Jiao, who looked like a scholar, held the reins with both hands and gently squeezed the horse's belly. He lazily urged the horse forward, moving up and down with the bumps of the horse's back. He had the demeanor of an immortal who did not kneel to heaven or the king. But when he saw the figure, he felt as if he had been struck by lightning. His eyes suddenly narrowed, and his face was full of disbelief and panic. He subconsciously straightened his back and urged the horse to speed up. When Song Jiao recognized the face, the horse gang leader, who had lived a comfortable life outside the Great Wall in recent years, felt relieved. Although the horse in front of him looked similar, fortunately, it was not that person. Song Jiao freed one hand and habitually touched the suet jade pendant on his waist. He asked with a smile, "May I ask if you are the General Yu who killed 30,000 enemies?" Su Fengnian, who was dragging the iron spear, sneered, "What, Song Jiao, don't you recognize me? Is this called a person of high status forgetting things?" Hearing the unforgettable familiar voice, Song Jiao's fingers that were stroking the jade pendant trembled. With his outstanding wisdom, he naturally guessed that the handsome child who could easily make the Gui Commandant Huangfu Jin obey his orders was His Royal Highness, who later took the 2 heads of Su Huainan and Raccoon Diwu from the hinterland of Beimang and returned to Beiliang. He was now the first vassal of the Liang dynasty, Su Fengnian. Song Jiao rolled off the horse awkwardly. He supported himself with his hands on the ground and bowed his head. "I didn't know it was the prince who came. Song Jiao deserves to die." The tip of Su Fengnian's iron spear lightly brushed across the sand. Song Jiao only heard a question from above his head. The secret letter asked you to lead the Yuzhou cavalrymen here. However, it didn't say that you could swagger over 1,000 cavalrymen here. Song Jiao's face was pale as he said in a trembling voice, "Reporting to your highness, there are Beimang scouts everywhere outside the Calabash Gate, and there are even thousands of regular Beimang border troops. In addition, Song Jiao's management is not good enough, and there was already an internal conflict in one of the nests. Song Jiao's people are disunited, and Song Jiao has mobilized all of his forces. This is a bad plan, and he really has no choice. In order to smoothly lead the way for your highness and General Yu, and not reveal any secrets, he can only bring all of his brothers with him to that most secretive valley with the Beimang cavalry. This way, even if there are still Beimang remnants in Song Jiao's team, the news will not be able to escape." Su Fengnian turned his head to look at the sky. After a glance, he turned back and smiled. "It doesn't sound like a bad plan, it's clearly a foolproof plan. Song Jiao, you are very considerate." Song Jiao still had his head lowered. "To be loyal to your highness and die for you is a great blessing that I have accumulated over several lifetimes. If it weren't for your highness and General Huangfu's nurturing, Song Jiao would be a pitiful worm leading 36 cavalry outside the pass. How can Song Jiao not do his best?" Su Fengnian looked at the 1,000-strong mounted bandits outside the pass 200 paces away. His indifferent gaze swept across them, and many of the mounted bandits also looked at him curiously, as if they were curious. No matter how famous the young one saber was, it should not have made the fearless leader Song Jiao so cowardly. The atmosphere was particularly solemn. More than 1,000 mounted bandits and 400 Yuzhou cavalry were facing each other. In the middle was Su Fengnian on horseback and the kneeling Song Jiao. Su Fengnian rode behind Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian raised his arm, and this action scared the mounted bandits. They thought that the two sides would fall out with each other. It was true that more than 1,000 mounted bandits could do whatever they wanted in the desert beyond the Great Wall, but in front of them were more than 3,000 Yuzhou iron cavalry. Did the mounted bandits have nothing better to do than fall out with the Beiliang frontier army? Why did they want to charge and kill? They must be tired of living. At that time, Song Jiao had used bloody means to suppress the forces that supported Beimang. Many of the central forces had stood by and even sided with Song Jiao because of Song Jiao's ruthlessness, and also because they feared the Beiliang cavalry from the bottom of their hearts. Although it was the Beimang army that was suppressing the Beiliang army, the mounted bandits were more afraid of the Beiliang cavalry. They felt that even if the Beiliang frontier army could not defeat the million-strong army of Beimang, the several thousand men surnamed you could turn the world upside down outside the Calabash mouth. If he was determined to deal with more than 1,000 mounted bandits, wouldn't it be easy for him to send several thousand of the Su family cavalry? But soon, all the mounted bandits were relieved. A bird pierced through the clouds and landed on the arm of the armored general. Many of the mounted bandits secretly broke out in cold sweat. Damn it, the general of the Beiliang cavalry, Yu Wandao, was not only good at commanding troops, but also good at showing off his power. Su Fengnian gently waved his arm to signal Hai Dongqing to leave. He did not pay attention to Song Jiao, whose expression could not be seen clearly. He raised his iron spear and pointed at two people in the mounted bandits. He asked, "Hong Yuang, how long have those two been with Song Jiao?" Hong Yuang looked up and saw the young man and woman. He slowly said, "I heard that the young man first appeared a year ago, but soon left the mounted bandits. Not long ago, he came back with the woman." The spider-web spies among the mounted bandits were also exposed by him, which led to the internal strife. "I only know that this person is the bastard son of the third family of the Gusai prefecture. He has known Song Jiao since he was young." Song Jiao said that this person almost entered the chess and sword music school. For some reason, he is sick and always smells of medicine. As for the woman, her identity is unknown. I only know that she is from the Golden Cicada Prefecture and has the nickname Buckthorn. Usually, she likes to drink with people. I have observed this woman. She is close to the master level. Her hands are full of calluses. She has practiced martial arts, but she does not have a strong Jianghu aura. Su Fingnian looked at the 1,000 mounted bandits and suddenly said, Song Diao, did you not expect to catch 3,200 Yuzhou cavalry and even make me, the king of Beiliang, take the bait? Don't hold it in. If you want to laugh, laugh out loud. Song Diao looked up with a blank expression. Hong Yuang was shocked. Su Fingnian looked at this extremely lucky mounted bandit and laughed. There are two groups of people in Qingliang Mountain. Hong Yuang and the others on the surface were left behind to help you lure Yu Wandao's Yuzhou cavalry. This is not strange. But I am very curious how you killed all the Beiliang masters in the dark. Logically speaking, the Tide Listening Pavilion and the Whispering Room sent out 3 master-level masters. With your little top-notch martial arts, even if you succeeded, you would not be able to hide it from Hong Yuang and the other Jianghu masters. I guess that you had the idea of sucking up to both sides a year ago. Only when Yang Yuanzhan led 300,000 troops into the mouth of the gourd did you decide to join the Beimang. Tell me, who is that young man and woman from Beimang? Song Diao was stunned. He looked up and met Su Fingnian's eyes. Then his face tensed up bit by bit. Then the corners of his mouth curled up. His smile began to ripple. When he patted the dust off his robe and stood up, there was already a radiant smile on his face. The furious Hong Yuang was about to crush this daring ant to death. Su Fingnian held the gun with one hand and waved his other hand to stop Hong Yuang from killing. He asked, other than those 2 couples, who are you hiding from? Who else can help you stay calm in the face of danger? Or how many? Song Diao's smile did not diminish. He extended a finger and waved it. Not many, just one. What a coincidence, it just so happens to be able to contend against your highness. Of course, this old ancestor did not come for you at the beginning. So, ever since this humble one met your highness, this humble one's luck has been so good that it can't be stopped. 3 riders suddenly appeared from the group of horse gang. Su Fingnian said to himself, Tuoba Bodhisattva, Hong Jingyan, Murong Baoding, Deng Mao, Zhong Liang. Beimang doesn't have many martial arts grandmasters now. Tuoba Bodhisattva shouldn't be here. I've met the other 4, except for Deng Mao, who was defeated by Wang Xiu, and they are not here. Since the ascension of the great immortal Yuan Qingshan, Taoist sect has no successor. The chess and sword music school has 5 first-class CI names. Sword Qi is almost dead, so the Bronze Man Grandmaster is gone. Not long ago, the great music house also died. That Han Gu, who won the first prize of the 2-word CI, is the crown princess, so it's even more impossible. 5th Raccoon of Tibbing Mountain is dead. In terms of masters, there is no successor. I heard that little thought died in Yuzhou. As for the person who killed her, he is still waiting for Su Yanbing's 3rd spear. Song Diao said with a smile, Your Highness, you would never have expected this. In the end, Northern Mang's sincerity is even greater than your Northern Liang's. Before you appeared, they offered a price of a major commander. After confirming that you would appear, Song Diao, would become the number 1 person under the Dragon Waste Province's festival warrant. Song Diao bowed to Su Fingnian to express his gratitude. Not far behind him were the 3 riders. Hong Yu looked at the funny scene of the horse gang's backs soaked with sweat and couldn't help but laugh. Song Diao raised his head and stood properly. He patted his chest and said with a smile, You are indeed the number 1 person in the world, Su Fingnian. I'm actually scared to death. I thank your highness for not killing me. Su Fengnian saw the rider between the young man and woman and laughed involuntarily. He said, "Old sir, it's you." The white-haired old Confucian scholar was thin. At first glance, he didn't have the bearing of a master. He was just a poor old pedant. Su Fengnian sighed with emotion. The old man was the same. The first time the two of them met was in Wild Goose Pass, which had long since become the Northern Mang Army's barracks. At that time, Su Fengnian had even teased the nagging old man by saying, "Old mister, bend over and see if your bag of books has fallen." The old man was the Baimang peace magistrate who had traveled for 20 years. Chapter 1398. The elder pointed at the young man at his side. "Tuoba Chiyun, spring restraining bowl, also my chess and sword music school's divination operator is slow, can't be considered a bad chess player, just too slow. Not long ago, he said that you would definitely appear outside the calabash mouth, so this old man followed him here." The elder then pointed at the woman to his left. "Yilla Yuhu, she doesn't have any evil intentions, purely wishing to see you with her own eyes." The elder pointed at himself. "This old man obviously wants your head, but it's a year or two earlier than expected." He is a bit disappointed, but even more so is admiration. To be honest, apart from Autumn and Winter's 7,000 elite cavalry, Hong Jingyan's 10,000 Ruren cavalry will also fill in the gap. If you insist on running, this old man naturally cannot stop you. However, you can only leave behind the 3,200 cavalry and head west alone. Before you leave, if you want to kill to vent your anger, apart from Tuoba Chiyun and Yilu Yuhu, this old man cannot even be bothered to stop the others. It's up to you." Su Fengnian asked, "Is it Tuoba Bodhisattva waiting for me in the west?" The elder shook his head and said, "Tuoba Bodhisattva cannot be moved. My great Mang's Chi cultivators are gone, your Bailiang still has Tantai Pingjing and Guanyin sect. Once Tuoba Bodhisattva moves, he will alert the enemy. At that time, Su Yanbing will definitely come. That Huyen Grand Monastery will be more than happy to not fight with anyone." Su Fengnian released an N of acknowledgement. "If Tuoba Bodhisattva is rushing over, I will definitely be on my way back right now." "Is that Murong Baoding and Zhong Liang working together?" The elder said with a sincere sigh, "Su Shao is number one in war, number one in marriage, number one in the world, 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 and even dying of old age in bed, formidable. In my opinion, Zhang Julu is far inferior to Su Shao." The old man was like a senior who was chatting amiably with a junior. He said calmly, "Both sides of the border have been tightly sealed. However, spies in Liangzhou and Yuzhou have sent back intelligence. This time, Chu Lushan didn't take any risks. For your sake, he transferred the main force of Liangzhou to Calabash's mouth. Fortunately, your Bailiang Protector General didn't actually do this, or else our great king of the southern courtyard's 500,000 soldiers would have had to run after him until their legs broke, and perhaps they wouldn't have had any good results. However, in the long run, abandoning Liangzhou for quick success and instant benefits may seem bold, but it is destined to be unwise." Su Fengnian said helplessly, "Old mister, victory is already in your hands. Why are you still helping Hong Jingyan stall for time?" The sickly Tuoba Chiyun smiled knowingly, while Yilu Yuhu stared intently at this young man who was completely different from the imposing figure he had imagined. From beginning to end, Song Diao had no right to interrupt. He was also tactful. Other than that Hong Jingyan, any one of them could drown him with a spit of saliva. He hoped that no one would pay attention to an insignificant minor character like him. When Song Diao heard the Taiping Ling's harsh words about burning the bridge after crossing the river, he was truly trembling with fear. He was afraid that Su Fengnian would casually stab a large hole in him with his iron spear. However, from the looks of it, Su Fengnian was too busy taking care of himself. He probably didn't care about the life and death of a mounted bandit like Song Diao. Song Diao rejoiced, but he also flew into a rage out of humiliation. He thought that once he became a major character in charge of half of the border towns in Dragon Waste Province, he would definitely slaughter his way into Yuzhou. Suddenly, Yilu Yuhu noticed that the Taiping Ling and Tuoba Qiyun looked at each other and smiled. However, their smiles contained a bit of self-mockery and a trace of helplessness. Yilu Yuhu frowned, still staring at the young man who acted against common sense. Thinking along the lines, she couldn't come to a conclusion, so she had to think the opposite. The guy in front of her couldn't have pretended to be calm in front of the Emperor's preceptor and Tuoba Qiyun. He definitely had something to rely on. The Crouching Bao city and Wanhe city had already fallen. It was impossible for Yuzhou to mobilize enough troops to cross the layers of defense to support him and the young general called Yuwandao. Liangzhou's main force also hadn't moved. Liangzhou's main force. She finally relaxed her brows. The playfulness of a cat catching a mouse in her eyes faded little by little, turning into coldness. Su Fingnian glanced at the Beimang woman who had allegedly threatened to teach his second sister, Su Weisheng, a lesson. He smiled and said, "You've been staring at me for a long time. Do you want me to get pregnant or do you want to get pregnant yourself?" Without waiting for Yilu Yuhu to retort, Su Fengnian smiled and said, "You better not fall into my hands one day." Su Fengnian raised the metal spear in his hand. Looking at her, he no longer smiled. He only slowly said, "Otherwise, I'll hang your corpse from above." The cicada was the supply line of the Beimang outside the gourd. The mantis was Su Fengnian and Yuandao's Yuzhou cavalry. The Oriole was Taiping Ling's trio and the Bates 1,000 mounted bandits, the 7,000 elite horsemen of the two great Jubo, Hong Jingyan's 10,000 Ruren cavalry, Zhong Liang and Murong Baoding. This created an interesting situation of the mantis stalking the cicada, unaware of the Oriole behind. But what was truly interesting was that, slingshot by the side, that could be said to be the finale. The old man sighed softly, but he still smiled at Su Fengnian and said, "They're gone, they're gone." Unfortunately, most of Hong Jingyan's Ruren cavalry probably won't be able to escape. The two great Jubo who came from the eastern front with great difficulty will have made a wasted trip. Su Fengnian, this old man will pass a message to Dongzhua, telling him to pay more attention to Chu Lushan. Chapter 1399. Su Fengnian suddenly looked at an unremarkable rider in the group of mounted bandits. "Old sir, you're not kind. You let a great grandmaster like Zhong Liang pretend to be a coward for so long." The old man seemed to have let go of the knot in his heart. He laughed loudly and said, "All is fair in war." Su Fengnian smiled. The old man had already turned his horse around. He turned his head and asked, "This old man is very curious. When did you know that the 10,000 riders would come? Or was this a trap set up by you and the Protectorate from the very beginning?" Su Fengnian didn't say anything. The old man shook his head and slowly left. The Order of Peace, Divinator Slow, Tuoba Qiyun, Yilu Yuhu, and the great demon Zhong Liang, who had been hiding among the mounted bandits until the last moment, returned north. Tuoba Qiyun coughed a few times. After stopping her cough, she said, "It's a pity that Murong Baoding still needs half a day to get here. Otherwise, we might have a chance to make Su Fengnian stay." The imperial tutor of Beimang said calmly, "It's not that Murong Baoding can't make it. He just doesn't want to." Before leaving, Yilu Yuhu didn't forget to make a chopping hand gesture at that bastard. At this moment, she said coldly, "They're all traitors." They were all traitors. Other than Murong Baoding, who else had the surname Murong? The old man had already closed his eyes to rest, turning a deaf ear. Tuoba Qiyun shouted, "Shut up." The demon Zhong Liang, who had returned without accomplishing anything, yawned loudly. He didn't want to get involved in anything. The old man was silent for a long time. Suddenly, he said, "Whether it's Yelu or Murong, even if one Beimang can't hold them all, as long as we take down Liang, no matter what their surname is, no matter how ambitious they are, it'll be enough to share. Yilu Yuhu said in a small voice, "Sir, I was rude." Behind the 4 horsemen, the more than 1,000 bandits who were baffled by the situation felt very bleak in the wind. Especially the dumbstruck Song Jiao, who had no idea what had happened. The situation had taken a turn for the worse. Yu Wandao, who thought he was going to fight to the death, came to Su Fengnian's side. The latter approached him and patted his shoulder. "Let's go back to Liangzhou together with the great snow dragon riders." Yu Wandao stared blankly for a moment, his eyes instantly becoming moist. He quickly turned his horse around and galloped away. Su Fengnian gave Hong Yuang a look. The latter nodded with a grin, and then stopped talking. Su Fengnian, whose back was facing Hong Yuang, said calmly, "You don't have to blame yourself. After you're done, go and tell the 1,000-odd mounted bandits that if you want to live, you don't need them to risk their lives. Later on, each of you will go to the battlefield and cut off the heads of 5 Ruren cavalry." No matter how stupid Song Jiao was, and how he had always been a very intelligent person, he should know what was about to happen to him. As a result, he fell to his knees with a thud and kowtowed with all his might. He said in a heart-wrenching voice, "Your Highness, please forgive me. Although Song Jiao deserves to die, Song Jiao still has 1,200 loyal mounted bandits that can be used. I can even help the Beiliang gather another 2,000 strong mounted bandits. Song Jiao will definitely help Your Highness disrupt the Beimang supply lines. Your Highness, I beg you to spare my life. Song Jiao really is still useful." No matter how Song Jiao kowtowed and begged for mercy, Su Fengnian had already left. When Song Jiao saw Hong Yu's feet out of the corner of his eye, he suddenly raised his head and roared before he died, "Su Fengnian, at least let this old man die by your hands." Hong Yu slapped his palm down on the head of this ungrateful mounted bandit and pressed down, turning his head and upper body into a pile of meat paste. It looked like a blood-red tree stump. Hong Yu lightly shook his hand and spat. He sneered, "You got off too easy." The Yuzhou cavalry had just finished cleaning up the battlefield. When they heard the news from Yu Wandao, there were no heaven-shaking cheers that came from surviving a calamity. All the Yuzhou cavalry who had thought that they would once again have to abandon the corpses of their comrades, silently carried the corpses of their fallen comrades onto their warhorses with red eyes. After Su Fengnian stopped his horse, he looked at the 3,200 Yuzhou cavalry, as well as the comrades behind them who had their eyes forever closed. Su Fengnian's lips trembled, but in the end, he did not say a single word. He and his horse turned around and began to head south. This cavalry would soon be able to head west, then south again, and they would be able to enter Liang province. Yu Wandao followed. Shi Yulu and Su Wenyao followed. Fan Fen followed. The 3,200 cavalry followed. That child Udilong was still hanging at the tail of the army. He sniffled and muttered to himself, "Big guy, I'll owe you first." Shi Yulu said softly, "General, I didn't dare to tell you before, but Lu Tao, who died on the battlefield 2 days ago, was that young scout who was waiting for you in Ji Bei village. Before this child died, he said that if you had time in the future, he hoped that General could pour a bowl of wine for his corporal in front of the tombstone on Mount Qingliang. It would be best if you could get him a bowl as well." Captain Fan Fan stretched out his hand to wipe his face. His expression could not be seen clearly. This child did not drink when he was alive. Su Fengnian nodded. He remembered that young scout. Back then, when he had returned from the village, the scout had wanted to speak but did not dare to. In the end, he did not say anything and only smiled bashfully. Su Fengnian suddenly pressed his horse's belly and raised his spear. He charged straight for the 10,000 Ruren cavalry and the Hongjingyan. Chapter 1400. When Hong Yu led the 1,200 mounted bandits to the battlefield, the scene before them was one that they would never forget for the rest of their lives. The Ruin cavalry, known as the best elite of the Southern Dynasty, had died in battle and their corpses were piled up like tombs. Meanwhile, the mounted bandits were unfamiliar and shocked by the white armored cavalry. There were some who were more knowledgeable among the bandits. They could tell that the arrangement of this cavalry was somewhere between heavy and light cavalry, with each person riding 2 or even 3 horses. However, compared to the Yuzhou cavalry led by Yu Wandao, they were clearly more imposing and majestic. This was because every horse was equipped with a heavy spear, and in terms of armor, it was a small full armor style for both man and horse. After the bandits entered the battlefield, they were ordered to chop off the heads of the Ruin cavalry and continue piling up their corpses. Meanwhile, the white cavalry began to remove their armor and hang themselves on the backs of the warhorses that they were not riding, preparing to withdraw from the battlefield. When the bandits chopped off the heads of the Ruin cavalry, they would often subconsciously glance at one of the riders. This rider was seated high on the back of a horse. He did not wear a helmet and wielded a spear. He was tall and sturdy. This rider came to Su Fengnian's side but did not dismount. Instead, he looked towards the south with Su Fengnian and said regretfully, "It's a pity that Hong Jingyan led several hundred of his personal guards back to the mouth of the gourd. Otherwise, as long as he died here, the remaining Ruin cavalry would not be worth mentioning. Yang Yuanzhan would have lost all of his mobile forces and we would have been able to kill our way into the mouth of the gourd and compete with the Beimang to see who could surround them first. Now, we can't. The 7,000 elite cavalry from the 2 bowls are still watching from the east." Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "Things can't be perfect. If you guys hadn't arrived in time, the Beimang peace decree would have joined forces with Hong Jingyan, Zhong Liang, and Murong Baoding. Not to mention Yu Wandao and the 3,000 Yuzhou cavalry, even I would not have been able to escape. Song Diaoer's betrayal is nothing, but to Oba Chi Yun, who had long guessed that I would appear outside the mouth of the gourd, is not to be underestimated. For him to be able to persuade the Grand Imperial Tutor of Beimang to come here, it means that he has a terrifying amount of authority in Beimang. Second Brother Yuan, when we confront him in the future, we have to be more careful." It was Yuan Zuozong, the commander of Bailiang's cavalry. He squinted his silkworm eyebrows and nodded. Bailiang paid more attention to Dong Zhuo and neglected to Oba Chi Yun. Su Fengnian looked around. "Where is she?" Yuan Zuozong said with a smile. "Commandant Wang led a group of crossbowmen to the west. He probably doesn't dare to see you." Su Fengnian felt a little helpless. Blue Bird, a second-class maidservant and kamikaze of Wutongan, after returning from Beimang with the instant spear left behind by Wang Xiu, she entered the Great Snow Dragon Cavalry and was promoted to a crossbowman commandant through her military exploits. She was more anxious than anyone else to rush to the mouth of the gourd to save the emperor. She led a group of crossbowmen in advance and was able to pull a distance of nearly 100 miles from the main army. According to the military laws of Bailiang, she should have been reprimanded and expelled from the army by the commanding general. But after the battle ended, she immediately disappeared. Yuan Zuozong gave the greatest trust and tolerance to this orphan of spear immortal Wang Xiu. It was not because she was a vassal of a vassal, but because although she was a woman, she was the best soldier on the battlefield. The heads of the Ruin cavalry from the 1st to the 8th were all smashed by her instant spear. Su Fengnian glanced back. In the distance, his third disciple Lu Yunzhang was standing next to his first disciple Yudilong. It seemed that Lu Yunzhang was spitting saliva everywhere, while Yudilong was silent. Su Fengnian sighed. He did not know if that girl Wang Xing, who followed White Fox to Beimang to practice the sword, had the same luck as her. Yuan Zuozong said softly, "It's time to go." Su Fengnian nodded. "Yes." Yu Wandao came to the side of Su Fengnian and Yuan Zuozong. Yuan Zuozong smiled and asked, "General Yu, the Great Snow Dragon Cavalry is still lacking a deputy general. Are you interested? Although I do not have the authority to appoint, His Highness is here. If you agree, I guarantee that His Highness will not refuse. He will only go with the flow. Su Fengnian smiled knowingly. The several personal armies of the Beiliang frontier army were all the family property that Su Shao had left for his children. It could be considered the most extravagant thing in the world. Apart from Su Fengnian's 800 white horses, his youngest son Su Longxiang's private army had increased from 10,000 to 30,000, becoming the mainstay of Liuzhou. Su Fengnian's two sisters, Su Jihu and Su Weisheng, also had their own personal armies. Beiliang's nearly 10,000 heavy cavalry came from these two armies. The Beiliang Protectorate could dispatch these personal armies under the name of General Su Zhao's children. However, they generally did not interfere in the specific military matters. Yu Wandao said calmly, "The Great Snow Dragon Cavalry is good, but our Yuzhou cavalry is not bad at all." Yuan Zuozong smiled but did not say anything. He did not care about Yu Wandao's unappreciative attitude. Contrary to the insistence of this Beiliang outsider, he admired him even more. Su Fengnian suddenly said, at that time, Kai Nan, who was in charge of the military affairs of He and Ji, stopped us. Yozhou's 30,000 cavalry could only send 10,000 out of the border. Old General Tianheng was angry that the Beiliang Protectorate, or to be precise, that I was not tough enough. He was so angry that he did not want to be the deputy general. He took off his armor and returned to his home. It is said that he secretly scolded me that Su Fengnian's courage was used up when he resisted the imperial edict. Yu Wandao's heart tightened. Although it was inappropriate for General Tian to be angry, Tianheng was experienced and prudent. He was a very righteous commander. The Yuzhou cavalry could not lack this stabilizing force. If your highness wants to punish me, I am willing to use all my military merits to atone for Tianheng's crime. Su Fengnian shook his head and said, I don't mean to settle accounts with him. I just hope that you can pass a message to Tianheng for me when you return to Yuzhou province. Tell him not to sulk anymore. I know his family situation. His two sons were killed in battle before they were 20 years old. How could the old general have a grandson to play with? Yozhou's 30,000 cavalry, he will be the chief general and Yu Wandao, will be the deputy general. Shi Yulu and Su Wenyao will be the general of cavalry and the general of agile cavalry, each leading 10,000 Yuzhou cavalry. At that time, the old general will most likely not be willing to be the chief general. You can say that it is an order from me and the Protectorate. He can either be the chief general or continue to play with his grandson. Yu Wandao immediately beamed and cupped his fists, saying, This general obeys. Su Fengnian said in a deep voice, These 3,200 cavalry will be established as the no-retreat camp. Yu Wandao will be the first officer of this camp. As for the soldiers of this camp, Su Fengnian will also have a name, but they will not be counted as active cavalry. Yu Wandao bit his lips and his eyes turned red. He abruptly turned around and galloped several hundred paces away. He took a banner with the word Su from a Yuzhou cavalryman and roared at the 3,200 Yuzhou cavalrymen, General's order, my 3,200 Yuzhou cavalrymen will set up a no-retreat camp. Yu Wandao raised the blood-soaked banner high in the air, no-retreat camp. Raise the banner today. The 3,200 cavalry drew their Beiliang sabers in unison. All the Great Snow Dragon cavalry also mounted their horses and drew their sabers, willing to show the might of this brave cavalry that had won the first camp in the Yuzhou border army. Yuan Zuozong, as an old general of Beiliang who had personally participated in a series of wars in the spring and autumn period, also drew his saber and subconsciously glanced at Su Fengnian. Yuan Zuozong did not see the passion and desire that would appear on a young general's face. Yuan Zuozong said softly, deaths in war are unavoidable. Su Fengnian said softly, "Let's go." The cavalry quickly moved westward, leaving behind a horrendous mountain of ruined cavalry outside the mouth of the gorge. Roughly an hour later, more than 100 riders slowly arrived at this bitter battlefield. The two riders at the front were two 30-something-year-old northern Mang high-ranking officers. One of them looked at the various capitals with a complicated expression. In a situation where the numbers are equal, when encountering 10,000 riders, is there really no way to win? Chapter 1401. The other rider said indifferently, "Purely in terms of fighting strength, our Yellow Murong's two kings' heavy cavalry are actually not inferior. In a battlefield where both sides have invested over 100,000 troops, in terms of cutting through formations, heavy cavalry still have a bit of an advantage. However, if you want to pick a place to fight one-on-one with 10,000 cavalry, there really isn't the slightest bit of suspense. There's nothing that can be done about it. The entire Bailiang cavalry's elite are all in the Great Snow Dragon cavalry, the age of the cavalry all between 20 to 30, the middle and lower level generals around 40, the higher level generals all veterans of the spring and autumn period, every single one of them riding a Bailiang first-class warhorse. If our Baimang truly wants to create our own Great Snow Dragon cavalry, it's not that we can't support it, but the key lies in who will be the main general. Dong Zhuo fits the bill, but he already has over 100,000 Dong family soldiers. Even if His Majesty is at ease, forget about biting, no one in the southern court is willing. Lu Gui and Yang Yuanzhan, these great generals who are familiar with officialdom, aren't willing to take on this hot potato from the bottom of their hearts." The first rider dismounted in a carefree manner, squatting down to pick up a ruined curved blade that still had traces of blood on it. He wiped off the blood on his armor, saying with a sneer, "Hong Jingyan really is pitiful. The entire Ruin Mountain Range's elite troops are his, yet in the end, he still wasn't able to seize the great king of the southern court and was even conferred the title of assistant minister of Xi Jing's Ministry of War. He finally thought that the Calabash Gate was easy to bully, wanting to lead 20,000 cavalry to unleash a slaughter within Yozhou's borders. In the end, he didn't even have a chance to attack Crouching Bao and Luanhe cities. Yang Yuanzhan and Zhong Tan have already begun fighting Sunrise Light, so he finally had a chance to make a contribution. He eagerly turned around and ran out of the Calabash Gate. Great, in just a short while, half of the Great Snow Dragon cavalry's forces were knocked down. The key is that this fellow didn't even dare to enter the battlefield. I really don't know if he can still sit on the seat of Ruin Lord. As for what he wants to compete with Dong Zhuo in the future, I think he should understand that there's no chance." The other rider did not dismount. He shook his head and said, "Hong Jingyan is not that simple." The squatting general's thumb lightly touched the edge of the Ruin war saber. "I'm very curious as to why that guy didn't fight with the Taiping Rit. If he could kill the medicine pot Tuoba Tianyun, and that woman who was about to have her title of Xia Zhibo snatched away by Zhong Tan, and then he would bravely die in battle at Zhong Liang's hands, how good would that be?" Another person said with a smile, "From this, it can be seen that in the battle at Lu province, this brother was seriously injured." The squatting general of Baimang stood up and looked at the man on horseback. He smiled and said, "Lord Dong Zhibo, that Yuan Tingshan from Ji province had personally forced Wei Jingtang to leave the city and fight with us. At that time, I was stunned. With only 700 to 800 cavalry and 4,000 infantry, he dared to fight with nearly 10,000 cavalry. It made me think that there were still tens of thousands of ambushing soldiers in Liang, or that there was a large cavalry army in Liaoxi tailing us. In the end, in just an hour, Wei Jingtang's men were all dead. Yuan Tingshan and his father-in-law's 7,000 private cavalry did not even make a fart. If I hadn't seen the capital built by 10,000 Ruin cavalry today, I would have thought that we Baimang could just casually bring out 100,000 cavalry and bypass Bailiang to flatten the central plains in one go." The general known as Dong Zhibo said with a deep voice, "The Ji province cavalry gathered by Yuan Tingshan and the private army of the Li family of Yanbao must be waiting patiently somewhere for us to return to the eastern front." You and I must not be careless. Qiu Zhibo twitched his lips. After mounting his horse, he tossed out the ruined scimitar and stabbed it into the roof of a capital. I really don't think much of that mad dog Yuan Tingshan. Instead, I'm very interested in the remnants of West Chu and Guangling. Two of them by the name of Ko Jianghuai and Xia Shibian. After Ko Jianghuai gave up his post, Zhao Yi's lucky general, Song Li, quickly led his troops to reclaim the territory with ease. Originally, they had the upper hand on the eastern front, but now, they are being suppressed by Song Li and don't even dare to show their faces. It is said that all the faces in that small imperial court of West Chu have changed. Those who had previously submitted petitions to accuse Ko Jianghuai of possessing an army for his own sake are all dumbfounded now. That is why they have begun to sing praises for Ko Jianghuai. Dong Zhibo said softly, as long as Chao Chongqing has yet to make his move, it means that even if West Chu does not have the upper hand, it also means that they have not fallen into a disadvantageous position. Qiu Zhibo chuckled and said, in any case, the messier it is, the better. Suddenly, this Qiu Zhibo turned his head to look at his peer, who was also one of the four great Zhibo. Wang Jingchong, do you think there will be a day when Xia Shibian and Ko Jianghuai will appear in Beiliang? Dong Zhibo stared blankly for a moment. His expression was grave as he said in a low voice, Great Ru Shiwei, you also have this kind of intuition. Qiu Yabo de Ru Shiwei rubbed his chin. That would be fun. But I like it. Back when Hong Jia was fleeing north, Wang Jingchong was still a 10-year-old remnant of the spring and autumn period. He had followed his family's private tutor into Beimang while reciting the sage's scriptures. He had long forgotten the environment of his childhood. However, on that kind of wandering path, the incessant sound of reading from the neighboring caravans had left a deep impression on this Qiu Zhibo, who had persisted in studying even after his family had entered Gusai Prefecture. On horseback, Wang Jingchong fell into deep thought. He muttered to himself, for the sake of reviving the state, you will cause the land of the Central Plains to sink again. Chao Chongqing, do you feel great pain deep in your heart? Since you know it's impossible, yet you still do it, then what exactly is Chao Chongqing after? Great Ru Shiwei shot a glance at this Qiu Zhibo, his mood complicated. The two of them were about the same age, but the achievements they had accumulated over the past 10 years were enough for the arrogant and conceited Great Ru Shiwei to admit that Wang Jingchong had not only accumulated more than himself, but also more than the she-wolf Yilu Yuwu on the grasslands. Of course, he had more than that Zhong Tan who had just amazed everyone on the battlefield of Huluku in Yuzhou. Zhong Tan had only just entered the army, but he had already become a vanguard general in a single leap. He had only just taken down Crouching Bao City, yet some people were already calling him the more genuine Xia Zhibo of Beimang. Wang Jingchong, on the other hand, had to start from the bottom of the ranks, step by step. He had been a sergeant, a centurion, a chiliarch, and then a general. However, in the end, he could only become Qiu Zhibo because he had the backing of the southern dynasty's Yi clan, which was allied with the Jia clan through marriage. Great Ru Shiwei's complicated attitude toward Wang Jingchong, to a large extent, also represented the entire Beimang's dilemma toward these remnants of the spring and autumn period. His Majesty was so open-minded and broad-minded that when he ascended the throne, he personally started a bloody case that was secretly described by the southern dynasty's literati as melon and vine plunder. The cause of the tragedy was actually a jar of ashes of the old head of the Yi clan. Originally, the Norland did not even care about the life or death of such a person. However, a memorial suddenly appeared on His Majesty's desk. Then, His Majesty ordered that all the old members of the Yi clan who were unwilling to be buried in the southern dynasty be beheaded and their clan's status reduced by one level. Even though more than 10 years had passed since the tragedy, there were still elderly remnants of the southern dynasty who died from time to time, but they still hoped to bury their ashes in the Central Plains and build a fake grave in Beimang so that they could be exposed. It was not until the decree of Taiping became the imperial preceptor of Beimang that this ban began to loosen. The Norland allowed the remnants of the southern dynasty to only build a cenotaph after they died and leave their ashes to wait for the army of Beimang to trample the central plains. Great Ru Shiwei asked with a smile, Wang Jingchong, there is also a place in Beimang that is known as Jiangnan beyond the Great Wall. How is it different from the real central plains? Wang Jingchong said flatly, I forgot. Su Fengnian and Yuan Zuozong squatted side by side on top of a hill when the army was resting. Su Fengnian turned his head and said, if the 300,000 border soldiers of Beiliang today were not surnamed Su but Qin, then there would be fewer casualties in Beiliang. Yuan Zuozong did not deny, many people think so, and I am no exception. Su Fengnian put his palm on the sand, but Li Shan said that once Beiliang was handed over to Qin Jibao, there would only be one situation, that is, Beiliang would be better and the world would be worse. Yuan Zuozong was a little confused. Su Fengnian chuckled softly, Brother Yuan, let me keep you guessing. I hope that one day I can help my master prove that he is not wrong. Yuan Zuozong smiled and said, I will wait. Don't worry. Remembering the withered scholar who lived on top of Tide Listening Pavilion and whose ashes were scattered in the border, Su Fengnian closed his eyes and said in his heart, Master, don't worry.